Chapter 950. Bastard, he's far too arrogant. Huashu Wuzong angrily clenched his fists and clenched his teeth. If Dalawan Ruozhen could hear it, how could he not? But not even the tiger of the empire, Zhangqiu Jianxiong, had dared to act so impudently toward them. Wang Chong was going too far. Prime Minister, don't be influenced by him. This bastard wants to infuriate us. Prime Minister, don't fall for his tricks. Heh. Dalawan Ruozhen shook his head and stopped Huashu Wuzong. How could I not see through his intentions? But we truly lost this round, and I wholeheartedly accept my loss. Wang Chong's art of war was far too unique. Not just in the Central Plains, but in the Four Seas. No one had ever seen such a military strategy or a commander. Dalawan Ruozhen wanted to learn Wang Chong's art of war, to use his own spear to attack his own shield, but he had still lost. But Dalawan Ruozhen only shook his head, and quickly returned to normal. He did not appear as dispirited or dejected as Wang Chong had imagined. No matter what scheme Wang Chong wants to use, or what effect he wants to achieve on me, he has miscalculated in this round. Because in this battle, his opponent is not us but someone else. Huashu Wuzong, help me send this letter. In this war between Arabia and the Tang dynasty, we have already done all we can to provide them with the greatest assistance. The rest is up to them. Understood. Huashu Wuzong took the letter from Dalawan Ruozhen and bowed. Let's go. With these words, Dalawan Ruozhen turned his horse around and rode back to Uzhen's camp. When he was 10 zhang away, he stopped and turned his head one last time. His gaze passed over the majestic city of Talas to the other end of the battlefield, where countless Arab cavalry were preparing for battle. Compared to yesterday, the Arab army was completely different. The atmosphere was even more somber and brimming with killing intent halala. Not long after Dalawan Ruozhen returned to the camp, a black hunting falcon flew down from the sky and landed in the Arab ranks. A muscular Arab guard quickly made his way to Abu Muslim, the hunting falcon in one hand and the letter in the other. Governor, a letter from Uzhen. The messenger knelt on one knee and respectfully handed over the letter in his hand. Oh, give it to me. Seated on his throne, Abu Muslim extended his right hand and took the letter from the messenger. After glancing at it, he immediately began to smile. Interesting. Ziyad, this is a letter from Uzhen. You should also take a look. Behind Abu Muslim, Ziyad's eyebrows rose as he glanced at the former in surprise, but he quickly took the letter and began to read it. The Uzhen have suffered severe losses, and are not going to fight today? What does the Uzhen mean by this? Ziyad raised his head in disbelief. Haha, didn't he say it very clearly in his letter? In this battle, he hopes that we can deal with the Tang dynasty on our own, and display the true strength of us Arabs. Abu Muslim indifferently said. These Uzhen truly deserve to die. These Tibetans truly deserve to die. Since we're allies, we should work together. Are they trying to preserve their strength? Ziyad's eyes faintly glimmered with anger. The Arabs did not need allies. At the very least, in their history of conquest, they had rarely invited anyone to become their ally. For the Arabs, agreeing to ally with the Uzhen was already an exceptional favor. But the Uzhen actually wanted to avoid battle and preserve their strength at this time. They simply did not know how to appreciate favors. They can't be blamed for this. Abu Muslim faintly smiled and waved his hand to stop Ziyad. Dalawan Ruozhen said that they've already lost 50 to 60,000 of their elite soldiers, and more than 80,000 wolves. This is not a lie. Although these losses are nothing to us Arabs, they are no small number to the Uzhen and the Western Turks. It's no wonder that they want to avoid battle and preserve their strength. Moreover, seeing is believing. If the Uzhen and the Western Turks do not witness our strength, they will not be truly convinced, and they will not be willing to risk their lives to help us Arabia. After all, we will still need them in the process of conquering the Tang dynasty. Ziyad, what about the 2 armies His Majesty sent? Abu Muslim suddenly turned to Ziyad. The 2 armies have already arrived. Everything is ready and ready to receive the order to attack at any time, Ziyad crisply said. When he spoke of the 2 armies, Ziyad's demeanor had completely changed. It was like he was holding some sort of enormous trump card that could crush them. Very good. Pass on my order. Get ready. On the eastern battlefield, the Western Turks and the Uzan, the Tang dynasty in the center, and the Arabs on the western battlefield. These three enormous powers had formed a triangle on the battlefield of Talas, facing off against each other. No one had launched an attack since the sun had risen, but everyone knew that this peace and tranquility would not last for long. Gallop! Gallop! To the west of the city of Talas, the thundering of hooves shattered the silence of the battlefield and attracted the attention of countless people. An Arab general more than 8 feet tall, his arms thick and muscular, riding a sturdy black warhorse, stopped more than 300 zhang outside the city of Talas. All the people of the Tang dynasty, listen up. Our Lord Governor has ordered us to give you one last chance. Surrender to Arabia and submit to us, and we can still give you a chance to live. Otherwise, today will be the day your city is destroyed. All was silent in front of the first defense line. And then there was a burst of raucous laughter. Arabs, shouldn't we be the ones saying that? Hurry up and go back to your governor, and have him think about when to surrender to the Tang dynasty. Across from the Arab horsemen, Sun Jiming was standing in front of the gap in the first defense line, laughing heartily. The Arabs truly were arrogant. After suffering so many defeats, they still dared to threaten the Tang dynasty and demand that the Tang dynasty surrender. This was simply the greatest joke in the world. In the distance, the Arab horseman silently watched the crowd, his expression stern and unmoved as he listened to the laughter. This is your choice. Since that's the case, then let's fight. As he spoke, the Arab horseman turned his head and made a gesture. A moment later, the situation suddenly changed. Boom! A massive boom came from the distance, so loud and clear that even the battle of hundreds of thousands of soldiers seemed insignificant. Not only that, but the ground beneath everyone's feet also began to tremble when the loud noise rang out. In a flash, not just Sun Jiming, but the thousands of Tang dynasty soldiers behind the first defense line all paled. What is this? The disturbance is coming from the west. What did the Arabs do? Did they use some sort of secret weapon again? The group of people were bewildered, but soon, the vibration disappeared. But just when everyone believed that everything was over, boom! Another massive tremor came from the distance, and then the entire battlefield of Talas once more began to tremble. This time, the tremor was even louder and louder, and it was getting closer and closer to the battlefield. What is this? Why does it sound like footsteps? Impossible! You've gone mad! What sort of thing could have such heavy footsteps? The group of people opened their eyes wide. They didn't know why, but even though they couldn't see anything, everyone felt nervous and uneasy. Bum bum bum. After the first, the second, the third, the tremors continued to grow louder and louder, and the sound grew closer and closer. The entire earth, the steel wall, and the ballistae in the middle of the city all began to tremble. Roar! Roar! An earth-shattering roar of a beast rang out, accompanied by a strong gust of wind that sent sand and pebbles flying. Under the shocked gazes of countless people, a gigantic silhouette appeared on the western horizon. It was incomparably tall, like a mountain range. In front of this massive figure, even the stalwart Arabs seemed as insignificant as ants. What's that? How could there be such an enormous thing? I must be seeing things. I must be seeing things. Just what sort of monster is this? Impossible. Everyone was so shocked that they couldn't say a word. Even from this distance, they could sense the savage and brutal aura exuded by that black figure, one that seemed capable of destroying the world. The strength of humans, even the strength of martial artists, seemed insignificant in comparison. Just what is this? At this moment, on the western side of the city of Talas, even Wang Chong and Gao Xinji were stunned. This had already surpassed the imagination of mortals. Wang Chong had experienced countless battles, large and small, but he had never encountered a situation like this. I don't know. The Arabs have never seen something like this before. It's unbelievable. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have dared to believe that such a primordial beast existed in the world. Gao Xinji muttered, his shock no less than Wang Chong's. War was a matter for humans, but the sight before them had already surpassed the bounds of what was normal. Even though they were very far away, they could still make out the silhouette of that creature. It was called a creature because it could move freely, and both Wang Chong and Gao Xianji could sense an intense vitality from its body. The vitality of a martial artist was like a drop of water in the ocean in comparison. Moreover, this creature had a huge golden horn like a rhinoceros, a huge body the size of a castle, and a pair of incomparably scarlet eyes. Even from far away, one could feel the desire to destroy everything from its eyes. Everyone who looked at it would involuntarily tremble and feel fear from the depths of their souls, as if they were ants facing a god. Could this be the behemoth army that once existed in the Arabian Empire? Wang Chong stood on the high walls, his mind in turmoil. For the first time, he felt that this war had completely surpassed his memories and become unfathomable. The behemoth army was a product of the Arabian Empire's golden era. Legends about them had spread far and wide. It was said that they had helped Arabia conquer several powerful countries. But for some reason, the behemoth army had vanished from the history of the Arabian Empire. Chapter 951. Everything's changed. The city of Talas has never seen a behemoth army. Could all this have happened because of my interference? Wang Chong's mind was in turmoil. Those absurd legends that he had once dismissed as laughable once more surfaced in his mind. It was said that at his prime, the emperor of the Arabian Empire, the Caliph, had two powerful armies under his command, one of which being the behemoth army. This behemoth army was under the Caliph's control, and no local governor had the authority to govern it. The appearance of these behemoths in the distant Talas could only mean one thing. The Caliph of Arabia had already noticed this place. This battle had already become completely uncontrollable. Bong! A heaven-shaking war drum soon began to resound from the Arab camp. As the drums beat, the dense sea of Arab cavalry parted, creating a path more than 100 zhang long. One end of the path led to the Tang dynasty's steel defense line, while the other led to the behemoth. The air instantly became tense. Behind the first line of defense, countless warhorses neighed and widened their eyes, looking extremely panicked. Even these well-trained and battle-hardened warhorses instinctively felt fear when they sensed the terrifying aura of those giant beasts. They wanted to break free from the control, escape, and leave this battlefield. Too shocking. The Arabs actually had this sort of trump card. If they had released these behemoths earlier, the city of Talas might have already fallen, and we wouldn't even have needed to do anything. On the eastern side of the battlefield, De Wuxia, Daluan Ruozhen, and Huishu Wuzong stood together on the high hills. They were all top-class individuals of the continent, but even they were stunned by the Arabs' trump cards. The matter can't be that simple. The Arabs must have their reasons for not using these behemoths. But no matter what, these behemoths that the Arabs have summoned are enough to pose a massive threat to the Tang dynasty. Daluan Ruozhen said after a few moments of silence. Although the truce with the Tang dynasty and having the Arabs deal with the Tang dynasty had been part of his plan, he was still deeply stunned by the Arab strength. Although he didn't want to admit it, the Arabian Empire truly was stronger than the Uzan Empire. On the continent, Arabia and the Tang dynasty undoubtedly stood at the apex of all empires. Only Arabia could deal with the Tang dynasty, and only the Tang dynasty could deal with Arabia. The high hills quickly fell silent as everyone turned to the western side of the city of Talas, to the Arab camp and the massive behemoth. Crack! A long whip lashed through the air. At the feet of the behemoth was a thin and hunchbacked Arab, dressed in a crimson robe, constantly shouting at the behemoth. Although he was grotesquely ugly, this hunchbacked Arab appeared to have an extremely high status. Behind him were countless servants and maids, their heads bowed and trembling in fear. It appeared that they were his servants. Not far from him was a black-clothed Arab guard, a bone flute in his hand as he played a strange and irregular tune. Under the command of the whip and the bone flute, the mountainous behemoth began to slowly move forward. Boom! 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 Again and again, the monster walked towards the battlefield, its heavy footsteps echoing throughout the battlefield. Under the golden light of the sun, the behemoth appeared even more savage and frightening. Whoosh! At this moment, let alone the Tang dynasty army in front of the city of Talas, even the tens of thousands of Arabs in the distance retreated in fear at the sight of this massive figure. Too big. In front of the behemoth, a muscular and valiant Arab warrior looked up at the golden horn, the massive body, and the scarlet eyes. His eyes flashed as he involuntarily retreated. The boundary between myth and reality blurred at this moment. It was like the behemoth of ancient myths had suddenly transcended time and descended upon the human world. Roar! The roar of the behemoth sent shockwaves of energy, seething with boundless power and majesty, stirring up a storm over Talas. Even the dark clouds in the sky were stirred up and pushed toward the sunrise in the east. A clear sky had been cleared over the Arabs. Hush! The Arab soldiers, who had already been terrified, began to panic and back away from Wangchong. The neat and tidy formation of the army was instantly thrown into chaos. The behemoth army. This was one of the most terrifying armies controlled by the caliph, and one of the symbols of the caliph's divine authority. Even to the brave and skilled Arab warriors, these were nightmarish existences. It's finally here. At this moment, no one was more excited and delighted than the supreme ruler of the Arabian East, second only to the Arab emperor Abu Muslim. He pressed his hands together and slowly stood up from the dark golden throne. In that instant, a powerful aura erupted from his body. In this world, there was no city that the Arabs could not break, no foe that the Arabs could not defeat. Abu Muslim stared at this behemoth like it was his proudest weapon. Countless powerful civilizations had once existed on this continent. Just like how the Uzun Plateau had once possessed the powerful Zhangshung dynasty, to the distant west on the shores of the sea, there had also once existed some powerful civilizations. These civilizations had vanished long ago, and many of their deeds were impossible to guess at. But there were still some remnants of these civilizations that had survived. The behemoth army had been created by the Arabian Empire, using a special method recorded in an ancient scroll left behind by another ancient civilization, using rhinoceroses, elephants, lions, and other ferocious animals, in addition to special medicines. After countless failures, the Arabian Empire had finally created the behemoth army that could dominate the western border and strike fear into the hearts of countless foes. There were not many of these behemoths, but they were the symbol of the Arabian Empire's power. There was no defense on this continent that could stop the attacks of these behemoths. Mazel, Abu Muslim stood in front of his throne, his eyes flashing as he waved his hand to the side. Lord Governor. After a few moments of silence, a low, hoarse, and extremely unpleasant voice resounded in everyone's ears. This voice was cold and sinister, like a venomous snake crawling out of the ground and slithering on a person's skin. Even Deputy Governor of the East Ziyad couldn't help but frown. As for the Arab generals around Abu Muslim, they subconsciously retreated, apparently wanting to get as far away from that stooped crimson figure in the distance as he advanced. Mazel was the personal bodyguard of the Arabian emperor, as well as the commander of the behemoth army. This person was shrouded in mystery. No one knew of his origins, only that he had suddenly appeared in Baghdad, in front of the emperor, and swiftly obtained the caliph's trust. Not long after, one of the most terrifying armies of the empire, the behemoth army, began to appear. Mazel's origins had long ago been a secret, and the emperor had long ago decreed that all governors and generals were forbidden from investigating Mazel. There was once a veteran general who had been nominated as a candidate for governor, but because he was suspicious of Mazel's secrets, he had sent people to investigate him, but he had quickly vanished from the face of the earth. The caliph's bodyguard had even led a large group of imperial army soldiers into his residence and exterminated his entire clan. This matter had caused a huge uproar in the Arabian capital, and it had a major impact. Although the caliph had announced that this general had sinister intentions and was plotting a rebellion, everyone knew how he had died. From then on, Mazel's name was feared in all of Arabia, and no general dared to approach him. Abu Muslim silently gazed at that crimson figure as it slowly advanced, his eyes showing little emotion. Mazel's status was so special that everyone feared him, but Abu Muslim had no interest in Mazel's identity or background. Moreover, as the governor of the East, Abu Muslim was only interested in one thing: completely subduing the foe before him. Nothing else mattered. I presume that you understand the mission this time? Abu Muslim said as he watched Mazel slowly walk up to him. Mazel's appearance was truly hideous. Even though he had covered most of his face with a red cloth, his exposed skin was still dry and wrinkled, like the bark of a dead tree. His grayish-brown eyes glimmered with a wicked light that made anyone who saw them shiver in fear. Lord Governor, be at ease. On our way here, His Majesty ordered that in the Battle of Talas, Lord Governors will be the one to decide everything. Mazel's back was hunched, his lips moving. Our opponent this time is extremely powerful. Do you see those steel defense lines in that city? I need your behemoths to completely crush them. I will take care of the rest. Abu Muslim paused for a moment, and then he solemnly said, Mazel, this operation is related to our plan to conquer the East, so I hope that you will put all your strength into it. You cannot be the slightest bit careless. Haha, my lord, be at ease. In this world, there is no opponent that my behemoth army cannot conquer. This is not the first opponent the behemoth army has conquered, and it will not be the last. Mazel coldly chuckled. After saying this, Mazel bowed and quickly left. Bong bong bong. The sound of the war drums was the signal to attack. The entire west side of the battlefield was silent. Everyone's gazes were focused on the man and the beast. Mazel stood in front of the massive behemoth and finally gave the order to attack. Chapter 952. Roar. A ferocious beast roared. In the next moment, the earth rumbled, and the atmosphere on the battlefield suddenly became extremely tense. Boom! In front of everyone's eyes, the mountainous beast spread out its 4 hooves, and its huge golden horn shone under the sun as it charged toward the 2 steel defense lines like a bolt of lightning. Bang! An enormous foot stomped down, and an Arab soldier, his face stricken with fear, was crushed into a metal pancake. But the behemoth seemed to feel nothing, leaving a trail of dust in its wake as it continued to charge forward. Rumble! The entire battlefield of Talas began to sway like a deck being tossed about in the waves. Fierce gales engulfed the city of Talas, and countless warhorses neighed, their manes rustling in the wind. They seemed more restless than ever. Hold the horses! Hold the horses! Everyone get into position and assemble. Prepare the ballistae. Attack with full force. The entire army was in chaos. As the massive beast charged forward, its dreadful aura seemed capable of toppling mountains and overturning seas. Let alone the warhorses. Even the hardest-willed soldiers of the Tang dynasty couldn't help but tremble in fear. This battle had completely surpassed their imaginations. This was no longer a battle between man and man, but a battle between man and behemoth. Everyone get ready. A thunderous roar resounded in everyone's ears. In a flash of light, a black silhouette leaped down from the city of Talas. The leaping dragon art. Wang Chong had immediately used this supreme technique. The walls of the city of Talas soared into the clouds. If a martial artist were to fall from them, they would basically be doomed. Although Wang Chong's leaping dragon art was not very powerful, it was the most suitable technique for a time like this. Bang! Wang Chong's foot landed, and his body spun several times in the air, before firmly landing on a section of the steel wall. The moment Wang Chong appeared, the entire army fell silent. Even the panicked mercenaries seemed to have found their backbone, and began to quietly prepare for battle. Wang Chong's mind was shaken, and only he knew that he was just as shocked as the others. Only he knew that the Arab behemoth army was not something that should have appeared on this battlefield. But Wang Chong could not show his shock. His eyes were like lightning bolts as he stared at the charging behemoth. The Arabs, the Tang people, and the thousands of Uzan and Western Turks in the rear were all staring at that terrifying beast. Even Dalawan Ruozan and Hueshu Wuzong narrowed their eyes and held their breaths. This battle was directly related to the outcome of the Eastern and Western empires. If the Arabs won, the entire continent would undergo an unprecedented upheaval. And as stakeholders in this war, the Uzan and the Western Turks would inevitably be dragged into it. Too powerful. That thick vitality isn't something a human can possess. Not even a great general can compare. Let's see how the Tang dynasty responds. No matter what, This isn't something that can be stopped by ordinary methods. What a formidable trump card. The destruction of the Anqi Protectorate Army might be decided today. Huashu Wuzong, Dusong Mangpoj, Dewusili and Daluan Ruozan, 3 generals and 1 minister, stood in a line on a distant hill, their robes flapping in the wind. In the distance, the rhino-shaped behemoth was getting closer and closer, its dreadful aura almost suffocating. 30,000 zhang, 20,000 zhang, 1,000 zhang. Behind the first defense line, all the Tang dynasty soldiers and mercenaries tightly gripped their weapons, anxiety in their eyes. Even their breathing became heavy, the stench of death thickening to the extreme. Wang Chong stood on the high wall, his hair and robes fluttering in the wind, his mind unprecedentedly focused. Master Archer squads fire. Wang Chong's calm voice resounded over the battlefield. Creak creak. Behind the first defense line, the fully armored master archers had drawn their bows to the limit. These people were brimming with energy and powerful physiques, all of them the elites of the Anqi Protectorate Army. Ever since the founding of the Tang dynasty, all the way up to the generation of the Holy Emperor, the Tang dynasty had placed unprecedented importance on the western regions. 600,000 soldiers had been carefully selected by the Tang dynasty, and the strongest had been sent to the western regions to form the current Anqi Protectorate Army. Only the Anqi Protectorate Army could form a phalanx of master archers be found. Not even Wang Chong had one. Boom boom boom. In the blink of an eye, the air boomed as tens of thousands of arrows exploded forward like a swarm of locusts. The master archers of the Anqi Protectorate Army could each control 5 to 10 arrows, and they could fire 2 to 3 times a second. A phalanx of 100 master archers could display the power of 3 to 4,000 archers, perhaps even more. Chi 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 in the next moment. Thousands upon thousands of arrows drew huge arcs in the air, as they rapidly converged on the huge rhino-shaped beast's body. But something even more shocking occurred. Of the nearly 10,000 arrows, at least 90% of them bounced off the behemoth's body. Not even the arm strength of the master archers could pierce through the thick skin of the behemoth. Seeing this scene, everyone was shocked. The master archers of the Anqi Protectorate Army were the elite of the elite. Although they were firing many arrows at once, each one of them had the power to pierce through rock from a distance of 1,000 zhang. Not even ordinary armor would be able to stop them. But the behemoth had managed to deflect more than 90% of the arrows. Impossible. At this moment, even the distant Dewusili and the others were deeply stunned. On the high walls, Wang Chong's mind was in turmoil at this sight. The creature before him had completely overturned everything he knew. Its body might not have been as tough as steel, but it was far more resilient. 80 to 90% of the arrows had been bounced off by the toughness of its skin and tendons. This behemoth's skin is at least half a foot of steel. Master archers alone aren't enough to deal any damage to it. As Wang Chong's mind spun, he quickly calculated the amount of energy needed to deal damage to the behemoth. As the behemoth charged forward, the winds above the 2 defense lines grew stronger and stronger. And the 100,000 Tang dynasty reinforcements were growing more and more panicked. The power of this behemoth made all of them tremble in fear. Fire again. Reduce the number of arrows to 2. As the army grew more and more restless, Wang Chong gave another order. Huang Batian, get ready. Earthquake art. All other officers hear my order. Prepare for lion's roar. The mood in the army was getting tenser and tenser, and Wang Chong's voice was the only stabilizing force in the army. In a few short moments, Wang Chong had issued a string of orders. With Wang Chong's order, the entire army of the Tang dynasty, including the Anqi Protectorate Army, began to move. Twang twang twang. Another volley of arrows howled through the air, crossing more than half of the western battlefield to strike the behemoth's body. Learning from the first volley, they had reduced the number of arrows fired at once and greatly increased the power of each volley. And the effects were immediate. Plush plush plush. The sounds of arrows stabbing into leather could be heard. Several thousand arrows had all pierced into the behemoth's body, none of them repelled. But before the soldiers could cheer, the behemoth's reaction silenced them all. Even though there were hundreds of arrows on its body, and all of them had pierced into its body, The giant beast did not slow down at all. It did not react at all, not even blinking its eyes. It was as if the rain of arrows had hit someone else. This behemoth, what thick skin? Behind the first defense line, a Chishi Protectorate soldier's eyes widened and his throat gurgled. Around him, the countless soldiers also had the same panic in their eyes. Normal creatures only had a thin layer of skin, but the behemoth before them was clearly much thicker. Its skin was even thicker than a 3-foot arrow. This was the behemoth's first layer of defense, and just this layer was enough to render many of their attacks useless. The wind howled, but at this moment, only Wang Chong was able to maintain his composure. His gaze was fixed on the behemoth, and he was constantly calculating. 1,500 zhang. 1,000 zhang. As the behemoth got closer and closer, the earth beneath their feet began to quiver to a height of half a foot. Looking at the behemoth from this distance was like an ant looking up at an elephant. The visual impact and soul pressure were indescribable. At this moment, even Wang Chong felt an intense sense of danger. The aura of death was surging toward him like a tide, ready to drown him at any moment. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Wang Chong silently counted down, and when he reached 1, Wang Chong immediately gave the order. Begin. Okay. Chapter 953. The moment the lion's roar was activated, Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Wang Chong's father Wang Yan, his big brother Wang Fu Li Sai, and all the other soldiers nervously stared at the dreadful behemoth. Roar. A roar louder than any of the Tang dynasty generals erupted, and then a wave of energy, weighing 100,000 tons, descended from the sky. Neigh neighed in alarm as several hundred well-trained warhorses broke free from the behemoth's control and fled from the defense line. Cries of alarm rose from the great Tang army, all of them alarmed by the ferocity of the behemoth. It's useless. These Arabian behemoths are different from Mengshi Zhao's elephants. They don't fear loud noises, and they don't have the elephant's weakness. Wang Chong wants to deal with the behemoths the way he dealt with the elephants, but it won't work. Dalawan Ruozhen suddenly said, his robes flapping in the wind. In the War of the Southwest, Wang Chong had used the same method to defeat Mengshi Zhao's White Elephant Corps. But it was clearly wishful thinking for Wang Chong to use the same method to deal with the Arabian behemoths. Although the Uzun had not participated in this battle, Dalawan Ruozhen had been paying close attention to Wang Chong's movements. Not even Dalawan Ruozhen knew how Wang Chong would deal with this crisis. Deep in his heart, Dalawan Ruozhen hoped that he would fail, but he also hoped that he would not fail so easily. At the very least, he would not lose to someone else. 800 zhang. The lion's roar of Wang Chong and all the generals of the Tang dynasty not only failed to stop the beast, but also angered it even more. Roar. The earth shook, and with a furious roar, the rhino-shaped beast charged forward with all its might. Not only did its mountainous body not slow down, it was even faster than before. Looking at the terrifying figure that could destroy the heavens and earth, everyone felt a deep sense of fear at this moment. It was as if they had fallen into the deepest nightmare. Wang Chong, Li Sai, Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Wang Yan, Wang Fu. All the commanders of the Tang dynasty had serious and nervous expressions on their faces. The giant beasts were very fast, and there was not much time left for them to react. If he wanted to resolve this crisis, he had to think of a way to deal with the Arabian behemoth as quickly as possible. Most troublesome of all was that the Tang dynasty had no way of retreating or running. If they retreated, the city could still be breached, and if they ran, there were more than 60,000 Uzun and Western Turks behind them, leaving them with nowhere to run. Huang Batian, the rest is up to you. Wang Chong turned his head to look at the distant figures on the ground. Ha! The winds grew fiercer and fiercer, and when the behemoth was only 600 some zhang away, a furious roar resounded through the heavens. The stone general Huang Batian, and the other experts of the Wushang village, who also had earth element abilities, and could use the stone general bent down for the first time, and pressed their hands against the earth, using one of the supreme abilities of the stone general. Earthquake art. The earthquake art did not require one to bend down and press one's hands against the earth. At the very least, Huang Batian and the 5 Wuxiang earth element experts did not need to do so. However, this time, for the sake of displaying this large-scale earthquaking technique, the 6 earth element ability users all lowered their bodies, displaying their full strength. Rumble! The ground shook, and ripples visible to the naked eye spread out in all directions. The originally hard ground also began to shake and change like water waves, and it quickly softened. Earth caving art. This was a variant ability of the earthquake art. It could turn the hard ground into soft mud, and cause the enemy to sink in. Huang Batian rarely used this ability, and he had never used it in the city of Talas. This was because the ground here was abnormally hard, and the layers of rock were much thicker than imagined. Using the earth caving art in this place was extremely taxing on one's mind and energy. Even someone at the peak of the Sky Emperor martial realm found it extremely taxing to use it. Bzz. The earth began to blur as Huang Batian and the other earth element experts pressed their hands against the ground. A few moments later, all 6 of them had pale faces and cold sweat on their foreheads. Rumble! The quaking of the earth intensified as the Arabian behemoth got closer and closer. Even Huang Batian felt an intense sense of danger. If he were to be trampled by that giant beast, even he would die. Go! Hurry! With this order, the 6 immediately shot off in 6 different directions. Behind them, the terrifying body of the gigantic beast was charging over, getting closer and closer. At this moment, everyone held their breaths, feeling extremely nervous. Although Huang Boshan's earth-caving art had been completed, all the Arab behemoth needed to do was turn around and change directions, and all their efforts would be for naught. 10, 9, 8, 7. As they got closer and closer, the behemoth that they had been worried about did not change direction. In the morning sun, the rhino-shaped behemoth was covered in a layer of red light, so it did not notice Huang Boshan's group. Amidst the rumbling of the earth, its speed and direction did not change at all. Bang! In the next moment, under the gazes of hundreds of thousands of people, there was a sudden loud roar. The legs of the mountainous beast turned soft. It was as if it had stepped into another space, and it quickly sank down. In the blink of an eye, only its neck remained above the ground. Boom! Heaven-shaking cheers exploded through the air. The 100,000 Tang dynasty reinforcements were elated at this sight. Wonderful! General Huang, good job. You trapped it. You really did trap it. Truly incredible. The oppressive and tense atmosphere instantly vanished, allowing everyone to relax a little. Life's greatest fear was the unknown. Only when one truly faced this Arab godlike behemoth would one understand just how powerful that fear and danger was. In front of this unimaginable behemoth, the strength of a human was insignificant and insignificant. But Huang Boshan's group had used the simplest earth-caving art, using the behemoth's own weight to trap it in the ground. Kill it! The morale of the Tang soldiers soared, and all of them began to grow restless. If the behemoth was trapped underground and unable to move, then no matter how formidable it was, it could only wait to be slaughtered. Marquis, I'll take some men to kill it. Shui Qianjun clasped his hands, his eyes gleaming. The countless soldiers behind him also began to grow restless. While the behemoth was trapped underground, all of them would attack together. No matter how formidable and terrifying the behemoth was, no matter how tough and thick its skin, it would still die. Enough ants could bite an elephant to death. Wait a moment. Wang Chong suddenly raised his hand to stop them. His brow was tightly furrowed, his expression extremely grave. Although the behemoth had been trapped and their strategic objective achieved, for some reason, Wang Chong still felt an intense unease. He felt that this matter was not as simple as it seemed. No one noticed that while the behemoth was trapped underground, the crimson-robed commander of the behemoth army, Mazel, suddenly sneered, a derisive smile on his lips. To think that a trifling earth-caving art could trap a behemoth that he had personally trained was truly childish. If these behemoths were so easy to deal with, they would never have become one of the supreme forces of the Arabian Empire, much less a terrifying army that struck fear into the hearts of the surrounding countries. Truly foolish. Mazel's mind was unperturbed by the sight of the behemoth trapped underground. These Eastern Tang people had no idea what sort of power they were facing. He had long ago seen the massive pit in the ground, and he had not ordered the behemoth to circle around it, because he felt that it was beneath him to do so. There was simply no need. Bang! As if in response to Mazel's thoughts, the rhino-shaped behemoth 600 jong away suddenly roared, and an enormous energy exploded from its body. All the rock, dirt, and dust in a radius of several dozen jong around the behemoth, as well as the power of the earth-caving art, exploded, sending countless fragments flying into the air. As everyone watched in shock, the behemoth's body jolted, and then it leaped out of the ground. Not good. The monster has broken free. Careful, careful. Retreat. Everyone was stunned by this sight, and the army fell into chaos. The behemoth's astonishing strength had left everyone stunned, and most frightening of all was that the earth-caving art of Huang Boshan's group had enraged it even more. The behemoth's vicious and murderous aura was completely unleashed. Roar! Roar! The huge golden horn swayed in the sky, stirring up a huge wave of air as it charged toward the first line of defense. Beast, stop for me! In the blink of an eye, a thunderous roar could be heard from the side. An enormous arm formed from countless rocks slammed into the rhino-shaped beast's head. Stone General! No, it's General Huang Batian. Many pairs of eyes looked into the distance in shock. Under the sunlight, they saw a huge stone general that had never been seen before rise from the ground and appear beside the rhino-shaped giant beast. This stone general was enormous, at least 5 or 6 times the size of an ordinary stone general. An evolved stone general. Chapter 954. Boom! Boom! As soon as the stone general's fist landed, another fist smashed into the rhino-shaped behemoth's head. In a short period of time, the stone general had unleashed at least 5 or 6 punches, each one incomparably heavy and powerful. This was the strength of a martial artist, something that no behemoth could compare to. But the behemoth's counterattack was also extremely fierce. With a swing of its massive golden horn, it smashed into the stone general. Boom! With an earth-shattering boom, the stone general that Huang Batian had created with the combined strength of 6 people was smashed into pieces by the behemoth's overwhelming strength. The 6 people were sent flying like cannonballs along with countless rocks. Whoosh! Huang Batian was still in the air when his body trembled, and he vomited a mouthful of blood. Too powerful. In the air, Huang Boshan's lifeless eyes were wide open, his face pale as he felt a deep sense of despair. The stone general that he had created with the combined strength of 5 people was like a scarecrow in the face of the behemoth's terrifying strength. It wasn't even on the same level. My lord, I've already done my best. You can only rely on yourselves now. As this final thought flashed through his mind, Huang Batian fainted. General Huang! Cries of alarm rang out from the ground. This had all happened too quickly. From the moment Huang Batian had gathered everyone's strength and used the evolved stone general to being sent flying by the behemoth, not even a second had passed. Not even Wang Chong had been able to react, let alone the others. Someone hurry and save General Huang and the others. Yes. Before Wang Chong had even finished speaking, Xue Qianjun had already leapt forward, leading several other elites in the direction that Huang Batian and the others had been sent flying. But this was only the beginning of their crisis. The behemoth, enraged by the earth-caving art, roared, its eyes bloodshot as it charged at them with astonishing speed. 1,500 feet, 400 feet, 300 feet. In a short period of time, the behemoth was less than 1,000 meters from them. This was much faster than it had ever been. The 4 huge stone pillar-like beast legs were constantly raised, flipped in the air, and stomped down at an extremely fast speed. Every single time, it was like stepping on the bottom of everyone's hearts, and it caused an enormous tremor and rumbling that seemed like the earth was splitting and mountains were collapsing. Phew! The wind howled, and sand and stones flew in the air, filling the entire defensive line. The giant beast's body could be clearly seen in the sand and dust. Its huge horn seemed to pierce through the sky, and its scarlet, disdainful eyes made everyone shudder. The battle was on the verge of breaking out. Everyone held their breath. The atmosphere was suffocating. No one had the time to think about the danger or the problem of escape. Countless gazes from all directions were focused on the huge beast. 2,000 feet. The distance between them was closing. Ballista troops, get ready. A calm and determined voice resounded over the entire defense line. Wang Chong stood on the steel wall, his hair fluttering in the wind, his eyes unprecedentedly focused. Clang! With a flash of cold light, Wang Chong raised his long sword at an angle, reflecting bursts of light under the sunlight. Creak creak. Countless ballistae creaked from behind the defense line. This was Wang Chong's first time personally commanding a ballista army. In a flash, 3,000 ballistae had lined up at the gap in the defense line, their pitch-black bolts aimed at the area beyond the defense line. All the ballistae of the Qixi Protectorate had been brought out to participate in this battle between the humans and the behemoth. On the other side, several hundred ballistae of the Anqi Protectorate army had been pulled out, their bolts aimed at the behemoth. One of the greatest problems with ballistae was their accuracy, but against such a massive target, there was no chance of them missing. With the appearance of more than 3,000 ballistae, the entire battlefield was silent. Even time seemed to have stopped at this moment. Everyone's hearts were thumping in their throats. The ballistae were the strongest weapon of the army, the final trump card. Whether it was in terms of sharpness, strength, or destructive power, they were far beyond that of ordinary bows and arrows. In dealing with the behemoth, this was the last resort. If not even the ballistae could deal with it, then the entire army would find it very difficult to threaten it. 100 zhang. There was only a distance of 300 meters between them. Even Gao Xianji revealed a nervous expression. If they could not stop this behemoth, the 100,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty would be completely wiped out and destroyed at Talis. Behind them, Anqi, Qixi, and even Longxi would all fall. Release! As countless nervous gazes watched, Wang Chong swung down his trademark Wuxia steel sword. At this moment, the entire world fell silent. Bang! The moment Wang Chong swung down his arm, more than 3,000 ballistae, more than 3,000 sharp and indestructible ballista bolts, howled through the air like dragons emerging from the sea, into the behemoth's body. Hong! A thick and long crossbow bolt violently shot into the beast's body, leaving a thick bloody hole. In an instant, it disappeared into the beast's body. However, this was only the beginning. Following that, the second, third, fourth, not a single one of the more than 3,000 huge black crossbow bolts bounced off. All of them sank into the behemoth's body, leaving more than 3,000 huge, bloody holes that looked like honeycombs on its body. The behemoth, which had always seemed invincible and capable of destroying the world, suddenly howled in pain. For the first time, it had been wounded. Even this mythical behemoth had finally been wounded in the face of the Tang dynasty, an important weapon of the Central Plains. How could this be? At this moment, even the distant behemoth army commander Mazel couldn't help but reveal a hint of shock. This was the first time since the establishment of the behemoth army that he had ever seen an empire use ordinary war machines to wound this behemoth that could destroy an entire country. Bang! Behind the second line of defense, an earth-shattering cheer of excitement burst out. The 3,000 ballistae and 3,000 heavy weapons had finally dealt a painful blow to the behemoth. Release! Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong swung his sword and gave the order to fire once more. Bum bum bum! The 3,000 ballistae fired once more, sending more than 3,000 ballista bolts howling into the behemoth's body. Release! In the blink of an eye, a third volley of ballista bolts had sunk into the behemoth's body. The excitement of the army reached a crescendo, their cheers soaring into the heavens. But Wang Chong quickly sensed that something was wrong. After 3 volleys, more than 10,000 ballista bolts had sunk into the behemoth's body. Although the behemoth's body had swayed a few times, and its momentum had clearly been hindered, the behemoth had not collapsed. Moreover, despite its injuries, the behemoth was still advancing toward the defense line. Wang Chong could still sense an extremely dense and vast vitality from its body. This was not the appearance of a behemoth on the verge of collapse. Not good. 10th unit, 15th unit, 17th unit, 28th unit. All of you fall back. Wang Chong's shrill roar echoed over the army. Lord Protector General, General Cheng, father, prepare to move out. The behemoth's vitality was far too powerful. 10,000 ballistae were enough to sweep through 50 to 60,000 soldiers. But they were still not enough to deal a fatal blow to the behemoth. Although it had been injured and its speed had slowed, it was still advancing. Hong! A gigantic foot descended from the sky and landed on the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust into the air. 50 zhang, it was getting closer and closer. 30 zhang. They were less than 100 meters from the behemoth, and when they looked up at it, all of them felt truly petty and insignificant. Compared to the vitality of a behemoth, the vitality of a human was far too weak. Not even a peak Saint Martial great general could compare to this behemoth. Boom! Before anyone could react, the behemoth's foot swept across a section of the steel wall. With a metallic clatter, the steel wall that 4 or 5 Arab armies would find it very difficult to topple was uprooted and sent tumbling through the air by a mountain-toppling force. Translated by Hypersheep 325. With a scream, 10 some great Tang cavalrymen failed to dodge in time and were sent flying along with their horses by the wall of steel. But this was not the end. In the blink of an eye, another enormous foot descended from the sky, but this time, it did not strike the steel wall, but the dense ranks of the Tang army. Boom! 20 some Ferganan mercenaries and Qixi Protectorate army soldiers didn't even have a chance to make a sound before they were crushed into metal pancakes. Damn it! Wang Chong paled at this sight, his eyes turning red. The behemoth's body was simply too massive, and each step covered an enormous distance. Even though Wang Chong had been prepared, he still could not stop the behemoth. Godking-yama formation. In the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint, there was a flash of light, and a huge four-armed god with a ferocious expression suddenly rose from the ground. As soon as it appeared, 2 mountain-shattering iron fists immediately landed on the giant beast's body. At almost the same moment, Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Wang Chong's father Wang Yan, Banahan, and the experts of the army began to move. 6 Ultimate Majesty's God Art. Supreme Desolation God Formation. Mighty Miracle God Formation. Great Fire Crow Art. Chapter 956. Awa! The rhino-shaped beast let out an extremely miserable howl. Blood gushed out from all over its body like a waterfall. A cavalryman under the beast's feet didn't manage to dodge in time, and was drenched by the scarlet blood, drenching him and his horse red. But Wang Chong's four-armed Godking-yama was different. His forearms struck out like lightning bolts at the behemoths. Wherever the ballista bolts struck, the massive stellar energy would cause the thick ballista bolts to shoot back out of the behemoths. Wang Chong's goal was to use these ballista bolts to stab into the behemoth's innards. Attack its head. In addition, use all your strength to drive those ballista bolts into its innards. Wang Chong's order resounded over the battlefield, and all the elite generals of the Tang dynasty gathered together to attack the behemoth like a storm. On the ground, many of the cavalry had arranged themselves into ranks, and were charging at the 4 stone pillar-like feet of the rhinoceros behemoth. Some of them had even jumped off their horses, plunging their sharp Wuxia steel swords into the behemoth's limbs, and climbing up its body. Gao Xianji, Wang Chong, Wang Yan, and Cheng Qianli have all moved out. For peak Saint Martial great generals are working together. This behemoth will find it very difficult to stop them. It will be rather difficult for the Arabian Empire to use a single behemoth to finish them off. The commander of the Mutri Great Cavalry, Huoba Senji, suddenly said. An army of 100,000 attacking a single behemoth was a heaven-shaking sight that no one could imagine. This was especially true of the 3 mighty gods, and the Anqi Protector General Gao Xianji. With 4 supreme experts working together, not even the strongest behemoth could outshine them. And the screams of the behemoth were proof enough. It's not that simple. The 4 of them aren't weak, but that giant beast isn't that easy to destroy. Just at this moment, a voice sounded by Xiao Chen's ear. The heavenly wolf great general Dewissely suddenly spoke with narrowed eyes and a sharp gaze. Ah! Huoba Senji turned his head and was slightly surprised. Can't you feel it? Although the behemoth had been severely injured, and its aura had weakened significantly, its life force was still exuberant. Its skin is too tough. Go Xianji and the others managed to block at least 3 or 4 of their attacks, but they were all blocked by that skin. Wuxia said slowly with his hands behind his back. Wuxia is right. Beasts are beasts after all. They can't be compared to humans. They don't know martial arts, and they don't know any moves. However, these beasts have an advantage, and that is their tenacious vitality. If Gao Xianji and Wang Chong want to kill this beast, I'm afraid they won't be able to do so without paying a price. A refined voice sounded by his ear. Dalawan Ruozen's sleeves fluttered in the wind, and his temperament was elegant and otherworldly. Huoba Senji was taken aback. He subconsciously glanced at the two of them, then turned his head and looked at the battlefield in the distance thoughtfully. Everything was similar to what Dalawan Ruozen and Wuxia had predicted. In the distance, the behemoth roared again and again, but under the stimulation of pain, it also went berserk. All of its potential burst forth. The behemoth raised its golden horn, and Wang Chong's father, Wang Yan, was the first to be unable to resist. The horn struck him, and he was sent flying. Then, the behemoth swayed its body, and its huge body slammed into the supreme desolation god that Cheng Qianli had transformed into. Cheng Qianli couldn't stand still, and he staggered backward and almost fell to the ground. Damn it! In the face of the behemoth's sharpness, even Gao Xianji had to retreat temporarily. This behemoth was too powerful. Although everyone's attacks could inflict serious damage on it, there was still a long way to go before they could kill it. Moreover, the behemoth's golden horn gave the 4 of them an extremely dangerous feeling. Wang Chong, be careful, it's coming towards you. Seeing the behemoth's horn heading towards Wang Chong, Gao Xianji hurriedly shouted a warning. Bastard! Wang Chong clenched his fists tightly. At this time, he also realized that although he had transformed into the God King Yama, he did not have a suitable weapon in his hands. The Vajra formed by his gang energy was not very useful against creatures with tenacious vitality like the behemoth. Moreover, Wang Chong's woozy steel sword could not even pierce through its skin. Seeing the behemoth charging towards him, Wang Chong gritted his teeth, but there was no way he could retreat. Behind him was a dense army. If the behemoth was allowed to run freely within the line of defense, it would only take a few seconds for the entire army to suffer heavy casualties. Open for me. The God King Yama that Wang Chong had transformed into stretched out his 4 arms. 2 of his huge steel-like arms fiercely grabbed the giant golden horn, while the other 2 thick arms pressed down on its head. His body leaned forward, his legs deeply pressed against the solid ground, and all the strength in his body burst forth. Boom, the earth shook. Wang Chong's feet plowed 2 huge, deep marks on the ground. After sliding for a few hundred feet, Wang Chong finally resisted the impact of the rhino-shaped behemoth. However, the behemoth's vitality was still very tenacious. It was only a few hundred feet away, but under the impact of the behemoth, the entire army was in chaos. Countless mercenaries and soldiers of the Tang dynasty in the entire line of defense were trampled into meat patties by the behemoth's power. Within a few hundred feet of the behemoth, there were corpses of people and horses everywhere. With such a simple impact, at least 4,000 people died under the feet of the behemoth. No, I have to kill it as soon as possible. Wang Chong clenched his teeth in worry. This behemoth was still far from collapsing. If he didn't think of a way to kill it, many more soldiers would die, and the number would be 10 times, perhaps even several dozen times. As the commander of this army, Wang Chong had no path of retreat. Cheng Qianli, Wang Yan, go help him. Gao Xianji's voice resounded in everyone's ears, and he was the first to charge forward. However, before they could rush over, there was a sudden change. Roar! With a heaven-shaking roar, the behemoth that had been blocked by Wang Chong unleashed its savagery. Enormous energy erupted from its body, and with a shake of its head, it shook off Wang Chong's grip and charged off in another direction. Not good. Everyone grimaced. This was the so-called desperate struggle of a cornered beast. The more heavily injured this beast was, the stronger it became, and the closer it was to death, the more potential it could unleash. In its current state, if no one controlled it, the entire defense line would become a bloody battlefield. Boom! With no time to think, Wang Chong suddenly mounted the rhino-shaped behemoth. This sudden development had the eyes of Mazel and the celestial wolf great general de Wuxia widening in shock. This scoundrel is a madman. This was the only thought in the minds of the celestial wolf great general de Wuxia and the others. Anyone with eyes could see that the behemoth had gone mad, in a state of complete insanity. Not even Mazel, the commander of the behemoth army, could control it. It has to be stopped. In his Godking Yama form, Wang Chong's entire body was tense. He could no longer sense what was going on in the outside world. All his attention focused on the behemoth. Boom! Wang Chong punched the rhino-shaped behemoth's head, and then a second, a third, a fourth. 4 fists rained down on the behemoth, but not even this was enough to stop the rhino-shaped behemoth. Wang Chong could sense that the flame of its life was rapidly dimming and weakening, but it was still not dead. More importantly, without the 4 of them to stop it, its massive body was still charging forward. Ah! Panicked and terrified screams came from the ground. At every moment, a large number of Qixi reinforcements were falling to the behemoth's feet, pile after pile. Blood flowed freely on the ground, and many people didn't even have time to scream before they were crushed into pulp. Wang Chong's heart was bleeding. He could sense that at least 5,000 or 6,000 soldiers had been killed by the behemoth. And if he did not stop the rhino-shaped behemoth, this number would only increase. Stop him! At this crucial moment, Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Wang Yan, Shi Yuanqing, and the others finally charged forward. The mighty miracle god, the supreme desolation god, and Gao Xianji's strength had finally managed to slow down the frenzied behemoth. Boom! 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 One heavy punch after another fell. Clatter! Clatter! Amidst the clanking of heavy chains, the supreme desolation god Cheng Qianli's hand shot out one huge stellar energy chain after another. Like spirit snakes, they coiled around the giant beast's body, wrapping around it again and again, firmly holding it back. The combined efforts of these great generals had finally managed to hold down the behemoth. Swish, 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 swish. The sword in Gao Xianji's hand unleashed fierce beams of sword qi that slammed into the behemoth's body. Bloody gashes appeared one after another, rivers of blood gushing out. Wang Chong, Cheng Qianli, Wang Yan, Shi Yuanqing. All the experts worked with the nimble Wuxian cavalry on the ground. Vajra pestles, iron fists, stellar energy, Wuxi steel swords, and ballistae fired at the behemoth. The rhino-shaped behemoth's vitality rapidly dropped, but despite these injuries, the behemoth still did not die. It was still struggling as if it wanted to advance. Such a terrifying vitality was completely unimaginable. Perhaps we should use this chance to kill them. On the distant hills, de Wuxia watched the battle between the humans and the behemoth, his eyes flashing with cold light. These words were so sudden that even Huashu Wuzong and Dusong Mangpoch were left dumbfounded. But after a moment's thought, they were greatly tempted. The charge of the behemoth had already thrown the Tang people's battle formation into complete disarray. In the current state of the Tang dynasty, if the Uzan and the Western Turks worked together to attack, they would definitely be able to throw the Tang army into complete disarray, perhaps even defeat it. This thought flashed through their minds. At first they were still hesitant, but slowly they became restless. Chapter 957. We will definitely strike, but now is not the time. As if sensing the gazes of the three, Dalawan Ruozan suddenly spoke. His first words left the trio dumbfounded. But wouldn't it be a pity if we missed this chance? De Wuxia said. Dalawan Ruozan looked forward, his wide sleeves flapping in the wind as he shook his head. Have none of you noticed? This is such an excellent chance, but the Arabs still haven't struck. The mood on the hill immediately shifted. The three great generals frowned, and subconsciously turned in the direction of the Arabs. Beyond the 2 steel defense lines in front of the city of Talas was a vast sea of Arab soldiers on the west side of the earth, a black tide of Arab soldiers stretching into the distance. But just as Dalawan Ruozan had said, the behemoths were attacking. This was such an excellent chance, but the Arabs had clearly shown no intention of attacking. The three great generals fell silent at this sight, their brows furrowing even tighter. The Arabs are quiet. If they haven't struck, it can only mean one thing. Abu Muslim does not believe that now is the best time to strike. They still have other backup plans. Dalawan Ruozan suddenly said, his eyes wise. The three of them were silent, but they all had looks of shock on their faces. This was just the beginning, and if they had other tricks up their sleeves, then the Tang army at Talas would truly be doomed, and would find it difficult to escape complete annihilation. But what truly shocked the three of them was the terrifying methods of the Arabs. With this sort of strength, it was very difficult to find any power that could contend against them. In the end, this is a war between Arabia and the Tang dynasty. We've already done all we can, so it's not wise for us to usurp the host's position. Moreover, although the Tang dynasty's army is in disarray, it still has the strength to counterattack. Don't forget that, with the help of the formation, they have at least 4 great general-level experts. If we force our way in at this time, we might end up being thrown into disarray. If we suffer too heavy of a loss, the Arabs might even look down on us. Dalawan Ruozan said. The last sentence caused the hearts of the three of them to tremble violently. As generals, the only thing the three of them had to consider was how to defeat their opponents on the battlefield. When it came to politics, he was not as clear and thorough as Dalawan Ruozan. It was true that Uzun and the Western Turks had only formed an alliance with the Arabs, but their alliance was far from being that deep. If they were too impulsive, and their strength was greatly reduced, causing the Arabs to look down on them, and the alliance to break, the gains would not make up for the losses. Whether it was Dawusili or Huishu Wazong, no one was willing to face such a huge beast. Hee. Dalawan Ruozan smiled faintly. He knew that they had already understood. Deterrence is far more useful than real action. We are now stationed here to block the retreat of the people of the Tang dynasty. This is a real attack on the Tang dynasty. They don't dare to retreat now, but if we really attack, at least half of the people of the Tang dynasty can take the opportunity to escape. That would really be a great loss. While Dalawan Ruozan was discussing with Dawusili, the battle between the 4 top-class generals of the Tang dynasty and the behemoth had reached its final phase. Wang Chong, in his God King Yama form, was seated on the enormous rhino-shaped behemoth, his Vajra pestle slamming into its body, while his other 4 arms were also attacking the behemoth with all their might. But when Wang Chong's attacks were at their fiercest, he felt a strange feeling in his heart. It was an indescribable feeling, like a flame was burning in his body just like the behemoth. The power of Lu Wu. As this thought flashed through his mind, Wang Chong suddenly came to his senses. What's going on here? Wang Chong froze. He could sense that the strength of Lu Wu, that had been dormant in his body this entire time, had suddenly awakened, and it was beginning to exert a powerful attraction on the behemoth. Wang Chong could sense an intense desire to devour it, and this feeling was only getting stronger and stronger. Bang! With no time to think, Wang Chong bellowed and punched. The moment he punched, violet flames surged out like a tide, engulfing his right arm and smashing into the behemoth's body. Owa! The behemoth, which had been in a frenzy, suddenly let out an unprecedented howl of pain. The behemoth's rich life aura was instantly reduced by a large margin, and the degree of weakening was even greater than any of its previous attacks. Not only that, as this punch descended, Wang Chong could clearly sense an enormous energy, brimming with life energy, rushing out of the behemoth's body and into his own. Wonderful! Invigorated, Wang Chong's strength of Lu Wu surged out and wrapped around the God King Yama's 4 arms. Bum bum bum. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong's 4 arms rained down on the rhino-shaped behemoth's head. Crack! With one final punch, Wang Chong's blazing violet strength smashed into the behemoth's golden horn. With a crisp crack, the horn was shattered from the base and sent flying. Without this horn, the behemoth gave a mournful wail as its massive body toppled over. Rumble! The moment the behemoth fell, the earth quaked and large sections of the steel walls were smashed into smithereens. After enduring tens of thousands of arrows, more than 3,000 ballistae, and a storm of attacks from 4 great generals, the behemoth's life had finally come to an end. I finally succeeded, A voice came from behind him, as Gao Xinji jumped down from the behemoth's massive body. His face was rather pale. The behemoth had not been much of a threat to him, but its powerful vitality had consumed a great deal of Gao Xinji's energy. This situation is extremely bad for us. I feel like the Arabs are using this method to exhaust our strength. On the other side, Cheng Qianli's supreme desolation god shook his wrist and pulled back the stellar energy chains binding the behemoth's body. His complexion was not very good. In order to avoid heavy casualties, he had put all his strength into this battle. We can discuss this matter later. The urgent task at hand is to gather the army. At the same time, Wang Yan emerged from the other side. As the commander of the army, he was most concerned about the state of the army. The behemoth had only been able to break through the defense line for a very short period of time, but this brief moment had dealt a devastating blow to the army. The 100,000 soldiers of Qixi had been thrown into disarray, their formation completely disrupted. "Chong'er, how are you?" Wang Yan turned his head to the other side, a look of concern on his face. These words immediately attracted everyone's attention, and countless gazes turned in concern to Wang Chong. Wang Chong's god King Yama sat motionlessly on the behemoth's body, seemingly lost in thought, a very strange expression on his face. "I'm fine." Wang Chong shook his head as he came back to his senses. In a flash of light, Wang Chong dispelled the god King Yama and returned to his original appearance. Wang Chong jumped off the behemoth's body. "Everyone, hear my order. Gather the army and return to your positions. Ballista troops, hear my order. Prepare to attack at any moment. Li Sai, Sun Jiming, quickly gather the soldiers and take stock of the casualties. Banahan, Guli King Gonka, I need you to stabilize your people as quickly as possible." The moment his feet touched the ground, Wang Chong quickly regained his composure and issued a series of clear and precise orders. The panicked army immediately calmed down upon hearing Wang Chong's orders. Only after issuing these orders did Wang Chong have the time to examine the behemoth. Only by standing at its side could one truly sense its enormous size and the terrifying energy surging through its body. Even though the behemoth was dead, the brief moment before its death had left an indelible impression on the soldiers. "Marquis, I've taken stock. In this wave of attacks, we lost at least 10,000 men, a significant portion of whom were trampled to death by the behemoth. In addition, more than 2,000 warhorses were frightened off by the behemoth. Even more serious is that the morale of the soldiers is extremely low. Our men are fine, but the mercenaries we recruited from the western regions are greatly affected. Right now, they're all showing signs of refusing to fight and fleeing. If we don't resolve this problem, at least a portion of the soldiers will flee." Suddenly, a voice came from behind him. Li Sai cupped his fists and walked over. "Not only that, a very long section of our defense line has been destroyed by the behemoth and urgently needs to be repaired. In addition, the behemoth's corpse is also a major problem. Its corpse is pressing down on our defense line, and there's a distance of more than 500 zhang that can't be repaired. If we don't resolve this gap, it will have a major impact on our defense line." Xue Qianjun also stepped forward, clasping his fists and bowing. "There's no need to worry about the behemoth. Even if the Arabs wanted to, they wouldn't be able to climb over the behemoth's corpse. As for the destroyed defense line, quickly have someone repair it. In addition, Zhang Shouji." At this point Wang Chong paused. "Your subordinate is here." At almost the same time, the azure-robed Zhang Shouji stepped forward. "How are the preparations for that weapon coming along?" Wang Chong suddenly said. As soon as he finished speaking, the bodies of Cheng Qianli, Gao Xianji, Wang Yan, and the others trembled, and they couldn't help but look over. Wang Chong was the commander-in-chief of the army, a position that no one could shake, so very few people would interfere with Wang Chong's decisions. But even someone as composed as Gao Xianji couldn't help but be a little startled by Wang Chong's words. Chapter 958. Lord Marquis, ever since that giant beast appeared, I've already organized a group of people to begin assembling it. However, this type of giant ballista is complex and time-consuming. I'm afraid that it will take some more time to assemble. Zhang Shouji lowered his head and bowed. Wang Chong, what's going on here? And what's that giant ballista? Gao Xinji couldn't help but ask upon hearing Zhang Shouji's voice. The Tang dynasty had ballistae, but he had never heard of giant ballistae. Wang Chong had said that these giant ballistae were time-consuming and also needed to be assembled. This was something that Gao Xinji had not known before. I once participated in the War of the Southwest. At the time, the Izan had a giant army. My lord should know of this matter. Wang Chong frankly said. Gao Xinji nodded. The War of the Southwest had a massive impact, and Gao Xinji had sent people to investigate, so he knew all this information. But what does it have to do with this? These giant ballistae are meant to deal with those giants. Wang Chong straightforwardly said, not hiding anything. Gao Xinji's expression froze, a hint of astonishment appearing on his face. Ever since the War of the Southwest ended, I've wanted to create a weapon to deal with these massive opponents. But my progress has never been very smooth. The construction of the ballistae of the Tang dynasty has always been a secret, and there's never been any talk of giant ballistae before, much less anyone who's tried to use them. Thus, I've spent a great deal of effort on this matter, and only now have I made some progress. The giant ballistae that Wang Chong had been secretly researching were meant to deal with the skyquaking giants, not these mountainous behemoths. But there was no other way, and Wang Chong could only try everything in a hopeless situation. Although no one else knew, Wang Chong was keenly aware that this was not the only behemoth. This attack was only the prelude. Time was short, and while Wang Chong and Gao Xinji were discussing countermeasures, Abu Muslim was standing in the rear of the army, his gaze piercing across the battlefield to stare at the behemoth's corpse. After a long while he finally looked away. It failed. It seems like the giant beasts have no way to break through the defense line of the Tang dynasty. A voice came from behind him. Ziad frowned and suddenly said, don't worry. He had originally been full of hope for the giant beast legion, but this outcome wasn't what he had hoped for. Abu Muslim said nothing, his face expressionless as he slowly turned his head and cast a profound gaze in another direction. 100 feet from him stood a crimson figure. It was the commander of the behemoth army, Mazel. This is just a coincidence. As if understanding the meaning in Abu Muslim's eyes, the crimson Mazel clenched his teeth and argued. There is no opponent that my behemoth army cannot destroy, and there is no city that my behemoth army cannot destroy. Give me another chance, and I will completely destroy them, tear apart their defense line, and destroy their cities. Mazel clenched his fists. He had never imagined that he would encounter 4 elite great generals on the same battlefield. This was not a normal situation. This was even more than the number of great generals the Arabs had encountered in the past. We don't need you to destroy them. We only need you to tear apart their defense line and destroy their cities for us. As for everything else, that's our business. Abu Muslim finally spoke, his voice tranquil as ever. No matter how formidable the behemoths were, they were not as intelligent as humans. In Abu Muslim's plans, he had never hoped to use them to completely destroy the enemy. Perhaps they could destroy the great Tang soldiers, but it was impossible for top-class generals like Wang Chong and Go Xianji to do so. You! Mazel's eyes flashed with rage at Abu Muslim's words. This was a naked insult and slander. As the commander of the behemoth army, and a trusted aide of the caliph, no governor had ever dared to treat him like this. Don't forget His Majesty's decree. In this eastern battlefield, I am the highest-ranking commander. Everything is under my command. Putting aside the question of whether or not you can kill the enemy commander, if you can't even complete the simple mission of destroying the enemy's defense line and cities, I will not hesitate to kill you. Not even the caliph will be able to save you. Abu Muslim said in an awe-inspiring voice, his expression as cold as steel that would not tolerate disobedience. Mazel fell silent. Abu Muslim's words were a form of humiliation, but just as he had said, Abu Muslim was the true ruler of the East. No matter how unwilling Mazel was, before the governor of Iron and Blood of the East, he had no choice but to bow and lower his head. As you wish, Lord Governor. I will complete the task you mentioned. I will quietly await your news. Abu Muslim gave Mazel a profound glance before quickly withdrawing his gaze. Although the battle was over, the tension in the air only increased. Behind the first defense line, a group of craftsmen was huddled together, busily working. Countless large parts were scattered around them, and in the center was an enormous machine that was slowly beginning to take shape. From its outline, this heavy machine was 20 to 30 meters long. Such a massive machine was not something that 5 or 6 people could operate. Although it was still incomplete, from its complex and massive shape, it was certain to possess astonishing power once completed. This was the giant ballista that Wang Chong had spoken of. Everything has a weakness, and these behemoths are no exception. No matter what, we have to find their weakness. While Zhang Shouji's craftsmen were putting all their effort into assembling the giant ballista, Wang Chong, overseeing the front of the army, was also pondering a question. Wang Chong didn't have a very deep understanding of the behemoth army. All his information came from rumors and rumors. But when he put together all the information, the Arabian Empire's behemoth army had probably vanished into the river of history long before the calamity. If they hadn't encountered an extremely powerful foe, then it could only mean that these behemoths had a massive flaw that was impossible to make up for. But what is it? What's their weakness? Wang Chong's mind was in turmoil. Wang Chong had never placed his hopes on something that he couldn't be certain of. This was not just a matter of 1 or 2 people, but an army of more than 100,000, a territory with a radius of several thousand li, and the safety of the capital in Longxi. Only by finding a way to completely deal with the behemoths could he win this war. Roar! As Wang Chong was thinking, the earth in the distance began to quake. 2 enormous energies, brutal and fierce, suddenly appeared in everyone's perception. In shock, Wang Chong raised his head. In the distance, 2 massive silhouettes, no smaller than the rhino-shaped behemoth, had appeared on the horizon. Cries of alarm rang out from the crowd behind the formation. All of the Tang soldiers and mercenaries who had just experienced the battle paled in an instant. One behemoth was already difficult enough to deal with, and now 2 of these powerful behemoths had appeared together. For the Tang dynasty, this was a calamity. What do we do? If this continues, all of us will die here sooner or later. The 100,000 soldiers of Qixi were in great waves of shock and anxiety. Countless gazes turned to Wang Chong and Gao Xianji. The strength of humans was far too insignificant in front of the behemoths. At a time like this, they could only place their hopes on these 2 commanders. Wang Chong said nothing. At this stage, the battle had already slipped out of his control. Not even he had any good ideas. Roar! The roars came one after another. No matter how fearful the Tang dynasty soldiers were, the 2 behemoths continued to charge toward the battlefield in the face of the sunlight. Against the dazzling sunlight, the figures of the 2 behemoths grew clearer and larger. Slowly, the soldiers were able to make out who these 2 behemoths were. One was similar to a massive hippopotamus, but its body was covered in tough scales that not even the rhinoceros behemoth possessed. These scales were layered on top of each other, forming an enormous armor that completely covered this hippopotamus-like behemoth. The other behemoth was similar to a massive wild boar. Its body was covered in tough black fur, and its limbs were thick and nimble. 2 pairs of sharp white tusks protruded from its lips. As it panted, its scarlet eyes stared at the majestic city of Talas, seemingly ready to attack at any moment. In both size and strength, these 2 behemoths appeared to be even stronger and more dangerous than the rhinoceros behemoth. Slap! The whip lashed through the air, creating a fiery boom as it struck empty air. An Arab guard loudly cursed as he walked, using his 8-meter-long whip to urge the 2 behemoths on. In just a few moments, the 2 behemoths had reached the edge of the western battlefield. The arrival of the 2 behemoths caused the mood among the Arabs to change, and the soldiers once more became excited. Your Majesty! Your Majesty! Your Majesty! The thousands of Arab soldiers raised their arms and cheered as they gazed at the 2 savage and ferocious behemoths. Everyone in the Arabian Empire knew that these behemoths were the caliph's favorite pets and the representatives of his strongest will. Even though they were extremely dangerous, As long as they could destroy their opponents, they were the best allies of the Arabs. Lord Governor, do you see these two behemoths? They have helped me and His Majesty conquer many countries and destroy many cities. In terms of siege and breaking defenses, there is nothing more outstanding than them. With them present, no matter how formidable the Tang dynasty's ballistae are, they will find it very difficult to pose much of a threat to them. Their size, strength, and speed are not something my sowars can compare to. Chapter 959. Abu Muslim said nothing. As he stared at these two massive behemoths, a few thoughts flitted through his mind. In the history of the empire, these two behemoths truly did have a thunderous reputation. Their nightmares had been branded into the minds of the conquered kingdoms, making it so that even now, they did not dare to lightly resist. Wherever these two behemoths passed, all prosperity would vanish, leaving behind only destruction and death, as well as hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of lives. These two behemoths are the terrorizer and the destroyer? Abu Muslim's eyelids twitched, and his expression finally changed. Correct, Mazel proudly nodded. The names of these two behemoths were legends in the Arabian Empire, so there was no need for him to explain them. Anyone who knew their names would pale at the mention of them and tremble in fear. Mazel was very satisfied with Abu Muslim's reaction. Begin. Mazel turned his head and gave the order to the rear. Crack! With the crack of a whip, the earth quaked, and the two behemoths that had stopped began to move once more. The tens of thousands of Arabs receded to the sides, opening a path for the two behemoths. Under everyone's watchful eyes, the two gigantic beasts that were originally leaning against each other, and not far away from each other, slowly separated. The scaled hippo behemoth slowly aimed at the two distant defense lines, while the savage and bloodthirsty eyes of the wild boar behemoth aimed at the majestic city of Talas. Buzz! This small change immediately attracted the attention of the distant Tang dynasty, and the army instantly began to stir. My lord, the Arabs have begun to move. Moreover, the city of Talas is also one of their targets. If the city of Talas is broken, we will find it very difficult to hold back. Shui Qianjun turned to Wang Chong, a very uneasy expression on his face. He was not a general who would easily panic, but this battle with these mythical behemoths had completely surpassed his imagination. If the Arabs were allowed to break through the walls, the Tang dynasty would have lost its final fortress and pillar of support before it could even engage in a large-scale battle. The city of Talas had all the supplies and food, and all the craftsmen lived there during the war. If the city lost its defense, these people would suffer heavy losses. Not only that, the fall of the city of Talas would render the two steel defense lines useless, giving the Arabs another avenue of attack. Moreover, if the city of Talas was penetrated from the front and back, the Arabs would be able to join up with the Western Turks and Uzan. Wang Chong's strategy of building a steel line of defense to separate the two enemies would completely fail. The alliance of the three great empires was definitely a disaster for the Tang dynasty. Wang Chong, the situation is bad. With our strength, there is no way we can deal with two giant beasts at the same time. Gao Xinji also spoke up. This war god of the western regions, who had been the anchor of the war, also revealed a hint of nervousness. Even though the four of them had used their god avatars and put all their strength into this battle, they had still needed a very long time to kill the rhino-shaped behemoth, and they had lost nearly 10,000 soldiers in the process. Now that two behemoths had appeared, the four of them would split their forces, and the casualties would be even more severe. We can't have any more large-scale casualties, or else the morale of the army will completely collapse. Cheng Qianli also revealed a hint of unease and worry. He had experienced countless bitter battles, but no matter how dangerous a battle was, he had always known that victory was assured, and that he had managed to survive. But in this battle, he truly didn't know what the outcome would be, or if he could survive. Zhang Shouji, how is the giant ballista coming along? How long until it's ready? Wang Chong suddenly said, his mind in turmoil. It's still not enough. The giant ballista is still just an idea. We've never tested it before, so we don't know if it will succeed. and we certainly don't know if it can deal with the behemoths. Everything needs to be adjusted, and there isn't enough time, Zhang Shouji loudly said. His silvery white hair danced in the wind. The wind blowing from the western battlefield was getting stronger and stronger, a sign that the behemoths were preparing to charge. The city of Talas was in grave danger, and everyone felt their scalps go numb, and their heads go numb. That intense sense of danger was driving them crazy. Zhang Shouji was no less nervous and anxious than Wang Chong. But the giant ballista was just an idea that had never been tested before. There were many aspects of it that were extremely immature. Zhang Shouji could only do his utmost, using his abilities as a grandmaster to assemble and modify the ballista. Beside the giant ballista that was being assembled, over 100 furnaces spat out flames at the same time, burning fiercely. Each furnace had at least 10 craftsmen working at it at the same time. Scorching hot molten steel was still emitting black steam as it flowed through the steel channels into the molds. Zhang Shouji was leading this 100-some craftsman team, currently adjusting the giant ballista on the spot and forging components as quickly as possible, so that Wang Chong's idea of the giant ballista could become a reality for the first time on the continent. As for the final result, not even Zhang Shouji could predict it. Wang Chong said nothing, his heart growing heavier and heavier. The giant ballista was just an idea, a glimmer of hope, but he could not place all his hopes on it. As he gazed at the two distant behemoths, Wang Chong's expression turned solemn, countless emotions surging through his mind. Everyone had pinned their hopes on him. Even Go Xianji had pinned a sliver of hope on him. Only Wang Chong himself knew just how much pressure he was under at this moment. But he couldn't reveal any of it. Li Sai, pass on my order. Have a group of soldiers move into the city. Zhang Shouji, hurry up with the construction of the giant ballista. In addition, I need you to forge a conical weapon at least 20 meters long and 1 meter in diameter. It doesn't need to be of high quality. Just make it as quickly as possible. A few moments later, Wang Chong issued a series of orders. Whether it was Wang Chong's sharp 3-foot-long Wuxia steel sword, or his Vajra pestle formed from stellar energy, none of them were enough to deal with these massive behemoths. What Wang Chong needed was a more powerful, a true physical weapon. Lord Protector General, isn't it a little inappropriate to have a portion of the soldiers retreat into the city? The reason the Arabs and Uzan haven't attacked is because our soldiers are outside the city, intimidating them to a certain extent. If we withdraw our soldiers into the city, we won't have enough soldiers, and might cause both sides to attack us at the same time. Cheng Qianli uneasily said. Cheng Qianli did not object to Wang Chong's decision, but he had to consider the chain reactions behind it. Dalawan Ruozan will not attack, and he doesn't have the strength to do so at the moment. If Dalawan Ruozan attacks, we can break out of the encirclement from the east. Dalawan Ruozan understands this, so he definitely won't move. As for Abu Muslim, you're right about one thing. He truly is using the behemoths to exhaust our strength. Until this goal is achieved, he won't move lightly. Moreover, if the Arabs follow the behemoths when they attack, they will also be attacked by the behemoths. Thus, as long as we don't withdraw more than half of our soldiers, Dalawan Ruozan and Abu Muslim won't easily attack. Wang Chong's eyes were wise as he slowly spoke. In this battle, no one had a better grasp of the situation than he did. His every move, every order, was the result of careful consideration. Understood. Wang Chong's explanation caused the doubt in Cheng Qianli's eyes to recede. Roar! Just as the two of them were talking, the air currents surged. On the west side of the battlefield, sand and pebbles flew and dust filled the air. A loud and clear roar of a wild beast came from that direction. In a few short moments, the two behemoths had finished adjusting their targets, and were finally beginning to attack. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the two behemoths shot toward the city of Talas. Rumble! The earth quaked as the first to charge out was the hairy boar behemoth. It twisted its body, and in the blink of an eye, it had overtaken the hippopotamus behemoth by a body's length. Its hooves were extremely fast, stirring up dust 10-some meters into the air. On the other side, although the hippopotamus behemoth was not as fast as the boar behemoth, it was not slow at all. Instead of feeling clumsy, it seemed extremely nimble. The two behemoths charged at the Tang dynasty's steel defense line and the city of Talas. Ready! A shrill cry resounded through the entire defense line. All of the soldiers quickly gathered and prepared, especially the ballista troops at the very front. Thick and long black ballista bolts creaked as they were quickly loaded and aimed at the target in front of them. Of all the reinforcements of the Tang dynasty, only the ballista soldiers could deal any damage to these mountainous behemoths. Wang Chong! Gao Xianji's nervous voice rang out in Wang Chong's ear. In the distance, sand and dust filled the air as it surged toward the city of Talas. When the two behemoths charged together, the terrifying momentum they exuded far surpassed that of the rhino-shaped behemoth. After witnessing the destructive power of the rhino-shaped behemoth, Gao Xianji was well aware of just how frightening their attacks were. They had to deal with them before they could reach them. Otherwise, the army would suffer disastrous losses. Even if they died within the defense line, the massive bodies of these behemoths could still cause massive casualties in the army. If they wanted to avoid massive casualties, the four of them had to think of a way to deal with these behemoths. Leave that scaled behemoth to me. As for the others, Lord Gao, Lord Cheng and Father, I'll leave them to you. Time was of the essence, and every second counted. As soon as Wang Chong finished speaking, he squeezed the sides of his horse and shot past the first defense line like a bolt of lightning. Li Sai Kong Xian, all Wuxian cavalry follow me. Chapter 960. The behemoths were extremely powerful, and without the agility and reflexes of a human, it was impossible to get close to them. Recklessly approaching them would only result in death or injury. In the entire army, the only ones with the strength to fight alongside him were the nimble, monkey-like Wuxian cavalry, who were used to traversing the mountains and precipitous valleys. Moreover, the God King Yama formation required the power of the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry. This was also why Wang Chong had to bring them along. Nay, the war horses neighed loudly, their hooves rising and falling. The moment Wang Chong charged out of the defense line, the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry followed, leaving a trail of dust as they fearlessly galloped toward the distant hippopotamus behemoth. After repeated battles with Wang Chong, the Wuxian cavalry had become extremely determined and powerful. No matter what sort of danger they faced, they would never retreat. Protector General Wang, Cheng Qianli, Gao Xianji, and the others paled in fright at this sight. No one had expected Wang Chong to make this decision. He wanted to face the behemoth alone. The Arabian behemoths were extremely terrifying. Even the combined strength of 4 people had been unable to stop the rhinoceros behemoth. So how could Wang Chong face an even stronger behemoth all by himself? Lord Protector General, we must call Wang Chong back. He's in too much danger. No one can deal with a behemoth alone. He'll die. Cheng Qianli worriedly said as he turned to his commander Gao Xianji. There's no need. Suddenly Wang Chong's father, Wang Yan, walked over from the rear. The battlefield has always been fraught with danger. As a great general, one must be prepared to deal with any situation, including death. Chong'er isn't a rash person, so I'm sure that he has his reasons for doing so. The urgent task at hand is to think of a way to deal with the other behemoth. As Wang Yan spoke, he turned his head to look in another direction. There, a huge beast that looked like a wild boar was leading the way and was about to reach the city. That's the only way. Gao Xianji took a deep breath and said in a deep voice. The city of Talas was very important. It was everyone's last resort. The defense line could be broken, but the city of Talas could not be broken. They had to stop that giant beast no matter what. Cheng Qianli Shi Yuanqing, everyone follow me. Gao Xianji patted his warhorse and galloped toward the wild boar. Army follow me. Almost at the same time, Wang Yan issued a military order with a solemn expression. Rumble! The earth quaked as tens of thousands of infantry followed Wang Yan's order and began to move out from the first defense line. The clanging of armor resounded through the world. As Wang Yan led the infantry troops into action, the atmosphere of the entire battlefield became extremely tense. Everyone's gazes were fixed in front of them, and even their breathing became erratic. Too terrifying. Other than the Lord Protector Generals, no one can fight against these behemoths. I hope that the Lord Protector Generals can stop them. Otherwise everyone will die. We'll definitely win. Please. All of them gripped their weapons, their hearts nervous and uneasy. Their strength was too minuscule, and all of them were terrified. Their fates truly were tied to the 4 generals. Bang! The earth quaked as the tens of thousands of soldiers in front of the first defense line began to shake, and the shaking was only getting stronger and stronger. Roar! Roar! A powerful wave of chi surged forward like a huge wave, heavily colliding with the first line of defense. The first line of defense could not withstand this pressure, and with a loud bang, it fell to the ground like a collapsing mountain and jade pillar, emitting a metallic sound. The distance between the 2 behemoths and the defense line had finally shrunk to less than 2,000 zhang. Look over there. On the walls of the city of Talas, figures pointed into the distance and cried out in alarm. The first to charge over was not the behemoth that looked like a hippopotamus, but the massive black boar. From the lofty walls of Talas, all one could see was a vast expanse of gray dust stretching for tens of thousands of feet. In this cloud of dust, one could faintly make out the vicious behemoth, its 2 scarlet eyes fixed on the city of Talas, brimming with a boundless desire to destroy. Just a glance was enough to make everyone's body go numb, a fear that came from the depths of their souls. 20,000 zhang, 1,500 zhang, 1,000 zhang. The black boar behemoth charged at a speed far faster than anyone had imagined, crossing nearly 1,000 zhang in the blink of an eye. In the blink of an eye, the behemoth had stirred up a gust of wind as it howled and galloped less than 1,000 feet from Talas. Up! A thunderous roar resounded over the plains. The first to attack the behemoth was not Wang Chong, who had led the charge. Rather, it was Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, and Wang Yan, 3 top-class imperial great generals. 6 ultimate majesties god art. Supreme desolation god formation. Mighty miracle god formation. In the blink of an eye, the 2 enormous gods rose from the ground, their iron fists the size of mountains striking from all directions. Together with Go Xianji's 6 ultimate majesties god technique, they attacked the black boar-shaped beast together. Great fire crow art. Almost at the same time, a ball of raging flames more dazzling than the sun suddenly shot up from the ground, transforming into a golden crow with a wingspan of over 200 feet. Its body was covered in black smoke and raging flames, and it fiercely crashed into the giant beast. At this moment, the Brigadier General Ferdinand Banahan also joined the fray. Awah! With a howl of pain, the black boar behemoth raised its head and howled. To everyone's surprise, the moment the behemoth was attacked, the behemoth leaped forward, showing no desire to fight. It passed through the attacks of 3 great generals and 1 brigadier general, instantly vanishing in the direction of the city of Talas. What? Everyone paled in fright at this sight. Their goal in attacking had always been to use this method to delay the behemoth. But the behemoth's reaction made all of them miss the mark. Not only that, but Gao Xianji and the others could feel that this behemoth was completely different from the rhino-shaped behemoth from before. Its skin was thicker, denser, harder, and more difficult to penetrate. The hard black hair on its body had a special power, and a considerable part of the attacks of Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, and the others were offset by this hard hair. Block it! Before they could think about it, they panicked and hurriedly chased after the black boar-like behemoth. But it was too late. Boom! Like a meteorite crashing into the earth, the behemoth slammed heavily into the thick outer wall of the city of Talas like a huge battering ram. There was an earth-shattering boom, and in that instant the earth buzzed. The hard surface of the ground rippled like waves, and a cloud of dust rose from the ground, forming a sea of dust. The towering city of Talas trembled. Starting from its underground foundation, it shook violently, as if it was about to collapse. Dust and gravel fell from the top of the city wall. Ah! Waves of exclamations came from the city, and fear spread rapidly like a plague. This time, in addition to the mercenaries, Wang Chong also brought a lot of herdsmen with him. They were the ones who drove the cattle and sheep that were used as logistics supplies. The behemoth's attack was simply the worst nightmare for them. However, before they could react, the behemoth slammed heavily into the outer wall of the city of Talas again. No, Dewusley was the first to react. As he gazed at the distant city of Talas, Dewusley's brow deeply creased. What's going on? The Arab behemoth is enormous and possesses extraordinary strength. Not even 4 great generals can stop it. How could the walls of Talas stop its full-force attack? The distant city of Talas seemed to be trembling and on the verge of collapse. But this was not what Dewusley was waiting for. What he wanted to see the most was the city of Talas completely crumbling under the charge of the behemoth. He was truly flabbergasted that the full-force attack of the behemoth had failed to conquer the city of Talas. It's not that simple. Dalawan Ruozen's calm and unperturbed voice came from the side, his scholarly face devoid of surprise. The city of Talas was established several hundred years ago. At the time, Talas was a wasteland, and the neighboring western regions was a battleground. When the Lord of Talas constructed the city, he had already considered the problem of sieging it. Therefore, they specially built a huge 100,000 Rakshasa earthen stronghold formation underground. It took more than 20 years and 700,000 to 800,000 people to build it. Their goal was to build a city that would never fall on the Silk Road to the west, able to defend against all kinds of weapons and disasters. Moreover, the myriad Rakshasa earthen stronghold formation is an extremely powerful earth element formation, and the city of Talas is constructed from those large boulders. The earth element energy makes the entire city of Talas a single entity, making it very difficult to break. This is also why the Arabs did not use earth element ability users to attack the city. Dalawan Ruozen said, "How come I've never heard of the myriad Rakshasa earthen stronghold formation?" Dewusley narrowed his eyes, a look of disbelief on his face. Haha, this matter was recorded in the annals of Talas from more than 100 years ago. I only managed to obtain a copy by accident. The emperor of the Abbasid Caliphate likes to collect records, so he must have some. Not many people know of this matter, but there's no doubt that it's true. Dalawan Ruozen lightly brushed his sleeve and indifferently said. Dalawan Ruozen had always liked to read widely, and he did not only collect the histories and treatises of the Tang dynasty, but also the books of the kingdoms of the western regions and other countries. Chapter 962. Kree. Chapter 954. Attack. Kree. A few moments later, the shrill sound of a bone flute resounded over the battlefield. The Terrorizer, which had been on the verge of going berserk from Wang Chang's attack, suddenly became somewhat clear-headed. Its scarlet eyes moved from Wang Chong to the 2 distant defense lines, and the dense ranks of the Tang dynasty soldiers behind them. Not good. The Arabs are controlling the behemoth. Wang Chong's body trembled as he sensed that something was wrong. He had charged out of the formation with all his strength, in order to stop the behemoth and limit the battle outside the defense line, so as to avoid heavy casualties. But now, the Arabs had clearly noticed this, and were doing their utmost to correct it. Roar! A deafening roar shook the heavens and the earth. The instant it raised its head, the terrorized one moved its 4 legs and stomped heavily on the ground. Instantly, an enormous power erupted from its body. Li Sai, watch out! Everyone get back! Wang Chang's pupils constricted as he sensed danger. The Wuxian cavalry had been on the ground this entire time, attacking the behemoth's short and thick limbs. Moreover, many of the cavalry had been in front of the behemoth during the charge. If the behemoth suddenly attacked, the Wuxian cavalry would suffer grievous losses. Retreat! Li Sai, Kong Xian, and the others had just begun to retreat when they heard a boom. Endless clouds of dust soared into the sky, and within this cloud of dust, the scaled Arabian behemoth charged toward the front lines with a speed that did not seem to match its massive size. Boom! As the several hundred Wuxian cavalry retreated, a massive foot the size of a mountain suddenly pressed down, leaving behind a deep footprint in the ground. The soldiers cried out in alarm at the sight of this massive footprint. If they hadn't reacted quickly enough, they would have already been pulps of meat. Beast, where are you going? Just as everyone was still shocked by the giant beast's strength, A loud roar suddenly came from above their heads. Wang Chang's attention had been focused on the terrorizer this entire time. As the Arabian behemoth began to charge into the distance, Wang Chang's God King Yama reached out with his right hand and grabbed onto the behemoth's hippopotamus tail. Up! With this successful move, Wang Chang lowered his center of gravity and half-squatted while his other arms pressed against the behemoth's hip to stop it. But the behemoth was incredibly powerful. Although Wang Chang was able to shave away a significant portion of its vitality with each blow, he was still able to absorb its vitality. But in terms of pure strength, even though Wang Chang had absorbed the energy of the behemoth and reached the middle great general level, there was still an enormous gap between him and the behemoth. When the behemoth gathered its strength and charged at the defense line, not even Wang Chang could stop it. Roar! Violent winds howled, covering the sky and earth, sweeping up countless dust and dirt fragments toward the steel defense line in the distance. The hippopotamus-shaped scaled beast followed behind the gale, galloping forward. Chi, chi, chi. Under the powerful drag of the giant beast, the God King Yama's legs left two extremely deep marks on the ground, and the smoke and dust behind it also surged. Damn it! We're no match for it like this. Wang Chang grimaced. Hoa! Cries of alarm came from the front as the soldiers behind the defense line began to retreat in panic. 1,000 zhang. 800 zhang. As the behemoth got closer and closer, the air grew more and more tense and panicked. Wang Chang was extremely worried. In the first wave of attacks, the Great Tang had lost 10,000 soldiers in just a few short moments. If the scaled behemoth was allowed to charge into the defense line at this speed, the army would collapse today. All their years of effort would be wasted. Army, get ready! Chen Bin shouted from behind the defense line. His right hand tightly gripped his Wuxia steel sword. The tip of his sword tilted as he stared into the distance. As Chen Bin spoke, the ballista behind the first defense line began to hum and hum. Thick black ballista bolts slowly rose into the air and aimed at the scaled behemoths. Raise the bolts 30 degrees and aim at the behemoth's head. Chen Bin's voice rang out in everyone's ears. Chen Bin's panic was no less than the others, but his voice remained calm, and his eyes were fixed on the giant beast in the distance. The army of 100,000 could only rely on the ballistae. The 3,000 ballistae were the army's final hope and defense. No matter what, he could not retreat. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The ground cracked and the mountains collapsed. The behemoth moved with incredible speed. 600 zhang. 400 zhang. The distance between them grew shorter and shorter. The billowing sand and wind swept across the sky, hitting the faces of the soldiers behind the defensive line like needles. But whether it was Chen Bin or the others, everyone stood there like statues, holding their posts and not moving at all. The behemoth moved with incredible speed. In just a few seconds, it had advanced another 100 zhang. It was now only 300 zhang away. At this distance, everyone felt a stifling dread. The threat of death caused even the most seasoned soldiers to pale. But even so, no one chose to run. Release! As the aura of death reached its peak, Chen Bin immediately swung his Wuxia steel sword down. Boom, boom, boom. Countless ballista bolts flew through the air like dragons soaring out of the sea, shooting toward the behemoth's head. The tens of thousands of ballistae fired in unison, their shrill screeches drowning out all other sounds in the world. Awa! In front of everyone's eyes, more than 3,000 crossbow bolts pierced the behemoth's head. The scaled behemoth let out a long howl as it suffered such a heavy blow. Its surging life force suddenly weakened, but the behemoth's running speed didn't slow down in the slightest. Release again. Unperturbed, Chen Bin raised his Wuxia steel sword and swung it down. In the blink of an eye, the second volley of ballista bolts struck the behemoth's head. Release again. The third volley of ballista bolts quickly arrived. Each bolt pierced through the behemoth's thick scales and tough skin, but they were unable to inflict a fatal wound. Not good. Upon seeing this, one of the ballista officers couldn't help but anxiously yell. What are you waiting for? The behemoth's skull is too tough. Our ballista bolts can pierce through its scales and tough skin, but they can't pierce through its bones. Of the behemoth's entire body, only its skull was covered in the least amount of scales. If they couldn't pierce through its skull, no matter how fierce their attacks were, they would never be able to kill the behemoth. "My lord, what do we do?" All eyes were on Chen Bin, who was at the forefront of the line of defense. Chen Bin said nothing. His hair was disheveled and his armor rustled in the wind, just like his mood. The ballistae were the army's final barrier. Not even the ballistae could deal with the behemoth. This was beyond Chen Bin's abilities, but he could not retreat, much less move. The ballistae were the source of the morale of the army. The behemoth roared as it charged forward. It was less than 200 zhang from the first defense line. "Chen Bin, get out of the way." At this moment, a heaven-shaking roar came from the front. Chen Bin raised his head and saw a violet flame flickering in the air. In a flash of light, a massive four-armed god suddenly rose up from the back of the behemoth. Head down, feet up, two massive arms pushed against the behemoth's back, flipping over its body from its tail to its front. Boom! Wang Chang's God King Yama's four arms smashed down on the behemoth's head, and the violet flame smashed into the behemoth's head. With a heaven-shaking boom, massive waves of energy surged through the air. "Zhang Shouji, is the giant ballista ready? How much longer?" Wang Chang's furious roars exploded in everyone's ears, and the atmosphere was extremely tense. "No, there's not enough time." On the ground, Zhang Shouji's hair was disheveled as he anxiously roared at the sky. Around him, countless blacksmiths had anxious expressions on their faces as they worked hard to assemble the giant ballistae. Their foreheads were dripping with sweat, but none of them dared to wipe it away. Time was too short. This giant ballista had required more than 1,000 people to build. They were already doing their utmost, but it was still far from enough. "There's no time. Hurry!" Wang Chang's panicked roars echoed over the battlefield. The behemoth was extremely powerful, and with each wave of its terrifying brute strength, Wang Chong had no idea how long he could last. The giant ballista was an important part of Wang Chang's plan, but he didn't have much time left. God King Yama's descent. With no time to think, Wang Chong used one of the God King Yama's strongest techniques. He normally wouldn't have been able to use this technique, and this was an ability that Wang Chong had only gained after breaking into the middle great general level. Boom! As everyone watched, Wang Chong's God King Yama crossed its four arms, and the furious howls of thousands of ghosts filled the world. Boundless origin energy and energy began to gather around Wang Chong and pour into Wang Chong's body. Boom! Wang Chong's feet spread apart and his body leaned forward, his four massive arms smashing against the scaled behemoth's body. The terrifying strength in his arms instantly pressed against the behemoth's head. Even the behemoth's terrifying strength was momentarily stopped by Wang Chong's explosive strength. Whoosh! Chapter 963. How could this be? The behemoth's power isn't something a great general can stop. On the distant hills, even Huashu Wuzong's eyes widened in shock at this sight. In terms of strength, he was actually stronger than Wang Chong. But not even Huashu Wuzong could say that he could stop the behemoth. Nothing is impossible. To do something beyond one's abilities requires one to pay a price. He's just using his body to endure the behemoth's charge. It looks astonishing on the surface, but he's already injured. Truly foolish. Dewussili's eyes were bright as he sneered. Although they were both great generals, in terms of cultivation, Dewussili firmly suppressed Huashu Wuzong and Dusong Mangpoch. With Dewussili's cultivation, he had long ago noticed that Wang Chong had suffered significant internal injuries. In the distance, as if in response to Dewussili's voice, the God King Yama's arm snapped off at the base and dropped to the ground. "Ah! General! My lord!" Cries of alarm rang out from behind the defense line, and even Zhang Shouji paled. Wang Chong was currently the barrier of the army. If even he was injured and could not stop the behemoth, then the giant ballistae would be meaningless. Everyone would be doomed. "I'm fine. I can still endure it." Wang Chong's voice came from above, apparently understanding their worries. "Zhang Shouji, where's my weapon? Give it to me." Wang Chong's voice was tinged with worry. Yama Descends was a supreme technique of the Yama. It could absorb the origin energy of all things in the world, the sun, moon, mountains, and rivers, to greatly strengthen oneself. However, this ability could not be maintained for long, and it would have severe side effects. Since he could not count on the giant ballistae, Wang Chong could only place his hopes on that weapon. A mere Vajra pestle formed from stellar energy was far from enough. Wuming Wujia Wui Wuding, how are your weapons? Are they not ready yet? Don't tell me you can't even forge a simple iron rod? Zhang Shouji was also angry. He turned his head and looked at the craftsman team not far away. Master, it's done. All that's left is the mold. It'll be ready in a moment. The young craftsman hurriedly said. Bastard. Zhang Shouji finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He strode over and kicked a few of his trusted disciples. Mold. Molds. Is this the time to care about molds? How pedantic. Hurry up and push the iron rod out. Zhang Shouji was so angry that he didn't have time to say anything. He pushed away the disciples and walked to the side of the craftsman. He reached out and forcefully opened the mechanism of the casting machine. Boom! With a loud clang of steel, a conical iron rod more than 10 meters long and 1 meter thick rolled down a steel slope from the casting unit, its whole body still emitting black smoke. The surface of this iron rod was still wrapped in a thick mold and reinforced with screws. Wang Chong, the weapon is here. It's all up to you now. Zhang Shouji's hair danced in the wind as he pulled open the mechanism and anxiously shouted at the sky. Okay. Amidst the thunderous roars, a huge foot grew in size, crossing the first line of defense and stomping heavily on the ground. Amid the exclamations of the surrounding people, a huge palm quickly reached down from the sky and grabbed the iron rod that had just been forged. Rise! With a shout, Wang Chong grabbed the iron rod from the ground. Howl! Just as Wang Chong leaned back, relaxed his resistance and grabbed the iron rod, the hippo-like scaled beast's eyes flashed fiercely, and it rushed over with all its might. That collision could topple mountains and overturn seas, and it shook the heavens and the earth. Perhaps even a mountain range would collapse from the collision. However, in the face of this earth-shattering impact, Wang Chong didn't flinch at all. Bastard! Good move! Wang Chong roared angrily. With both hands holding the 10-meter-long iron rod, he didn't dodge or evade, and smashed it down heavily. Rumble! Wang Chong used all his strength in this strike. With a deafening sound, the scaled beast's head was smashed several meters away from Wang Chong. The force of the strike was so great that the beast's head was smashed into the ground. It let out a shocking roar, and even its head seemed to be split open. The giant beast was smashed to the ground by the rod, and it lost its balance. Half of its body slammed into the ground, creating a huge crater in the ground with a loud rumble. Beast, eat another one of my moves. Wang Chong's right foot stomped down on the behemoth's head. His two arms gripped the metal cudgel, and with a forceful tug, all the molds on the cudgel fell to the ground. Wang Chong gripped the thick end of the cudgel and turned it around to stab at the behemoth's head. Awah! With a cracking sound, the behemoth's tough skull was pierced through by the sharp tip of the iron rod, a part of it stabbing into the skull. This strike dealt an unprecedented wound to the scaled behemoth, and its vigorous flame of life instantly dimmed by half. Damn it! This bastard! Mazel paled at the wretched howls of the behemoth. His fingernails dug into his palms, his eyes bursting with hatred and rage. Even he could sense that the behemoth was in unprecedented danger. If this continued, the illustrious terrorizer that had once destroyed countless countries and cities, that had become synonymous with death, would truly be slain by an Eastern human in the city of Talis. Bring the bow! A cold and dignified voice came from the rear of the army. Abu Muslim narrowed his eyes and extended an arm. A large golden bow, half the height of a man, and a red bowstring made from the meridians of some unknown behemoth, was delivered into Abu Muslim's hand. This was Abu Muslim's treasured bow, the bloody slaughterer. Abu Muslim rarely used this bow, only in extremely troublesome situations, or when facing extremely troublesome opponents. The terrorizer and the destroyer were the symbols of the caliph and important fighting forces of the empire. Whether it was for the dignity of the caliph or for the victory of the war, Abu Muslim could not allow Wang Chong to succeed. Buzz! Without the slightest hesitation, Abu Muslim's feet spread apart, a golden arrow was knocked on the bowstring, and he drew the bow back until it was a full moon. Rumble! There was a boom that was thousands of times louder than thunder, and it seemed like the entire world was about to shatter. Before anyone could react, Abu Muslim had released the bowstring and fired the arrow. No one could describe the speed of this arrow. In the blink of an eye, the golden arrow had crossed more than half the battlefield and appeared behind the behemoth. The place where the arrow passed through was a long, straight vacuum. From afar, it looked like a white wave that was thousands of meters long. However, behind this extreme splendor, there was a deep and terrifying killing intent. No one had expected Abu Muslim to fire an arrow and enter the battlefield, let alone Wang Chong. Even the distant De Wisili, Huashu Wizang, and Dalawan Ruozan were deeply stunned. And Abu Muslim's timing was perfect. Right when Wang Chong was locked in a fierce battle with the behemoth, and all his attention was focused on the behemoth. Not good. The first to notice this sight was the distant Gao Xianji. When he had been dealing with the Black Boar behemoth, he had been facing the defense line. So he had clearly seen that Abu Muslim's arrow was aimed at the Shanzhong point on the God King Yama's chest. That was where Wang Chong's main body was when he used the God King Yama formation. If Abu Muslim's arrow hit him, Wang Chong would be doomed. Abu Muslim's reaction was fast, but Wang Chong's was even faster. The moment the arrow was fired, Wang Chong had sensed it. Although Wang Chong's martial arts had not reached the level of his last life, his psychic energy had long ago reached the peak of the Saint Martial realm. Although Abu Muslim's attack was sudden, it still failed to escape Wang Chong's psychic energy. Boom! There was a massive explosion of energy as Wang Chong leaned to the side and smashed his metal cudgel against Abu Muslim's golden arrow. The huge force directly smashed the arrow into pieces. How could this be? In the rear of the army, Ziad's body trembled as he stared in shock, almost not daring to believe his eyes. The governor rarely fired an arrow, but when he did, he would always choose a moment that would make it impossible for his opponent to dodge. But that young Tang people commander in the distance, not only had he sensed it ahead of time and dodged the arrow, he had even shattered it with a single blow of his cudgel. Ziad had never seen such a thing happen before. "My lord." Ziad's heart trembled as he subconsciously turned to Abu Muslim. Abu Muslim's back was still as steady and dignified as ever, but Ziad could still sense a slight tremor in his heart. It was clear that he had not expected this. But Abu Muslim said nothing. He slowly put down the golden bow and sat back down on his throne, as if nothing had happened. "Take it." Abu Muslim passed the bow in his hand to the guard next to him. "But, my lord, this might have just been a coincidence. If you fire a few more arrows, that Tang people will definitely be unable to stop them." Ziad finally couldn't help but say, his expression faintly uneasy. "There's no need." Abu Muslim immediately rejected the offer. "Since the first arrow was useless, the second and third arrows will be useless as well. These Tang people are far more formidable than you and I imagine. And besides, I never fire a second arrow." Chapter 966. Fury of the Yama. Just when the Black Boar behemoth was about to smash into the walls again, Wang Chong's Black God King Yama soared into the air, his massive cudgel blazing with violet flames as he smashed it against the behemoth's head. At almost the same time, there was a massive boom as the giant ballistae controlled by Chen Bin and Su Qi also attacked. Two massive ballista bolts struck the head of the Black Boar behemoth. Owa! The black boar-like beast, the destroyer, suddenly raised its head and let out a long, mournful howl. This time its long iron-like hair and tough, elastic skin were not of any use. Two long crossbow bolts pierced through its skin and bones, stabbing deep into its head. This time, the destroyer finally suffered an unprecedented blow. Boom! Boom! Just as the destroyer was howling miserably, another two long crossbow bolts whizzed over from afar and hit the destroyer's head. The exuberant flames of life of the Black Boar behemoth instantly dimmed, as if they had been doused in frost. Wonderful! Gao Xinji, Cheng Qianli, and Wang Yin were invigorated by this sight. Without the slightest hesitation, the three great generals of the Tang dynasty worked together with Wang Chong and the two giant ballistae to attack the Black Boar behemoth. 1 second, 2 seconds. The life energy of the black boar behemoth began to wane at an astonishing rate. Awah! The behemoth roared, its scarlet eyes turning to stare at the two giant ballistae in the distance as it madly charged forward. The behemoth's attention had originally been focused on the siege, and the two giant ballistae seemed to be dealing more damage to it than the three great generals. Each blow was so painful that the behemoth had no choice but to pay attention to the two ballistae even if it didn't want to. Stop it! Gao Xianji and the others kept their attention on the gigantic beast. As soon as the gigantic beast turned around, numerous gigantic chains of astral energy flew out, wrapping around the black boar-like beast and pulling it back. Immediately after that, the supreme desolation god, the mighty miracle god, Gao Xianji, and the god King Yama, that Wang Chong had transformed into rammed into the beast's ribs. The black boar-like beast charged left and right, but it was blocked every time. Not only that, the beast's head was hit by another 7 or 8 arrows. Release! Release! The two giant ballistae were lined up side by side. Chen Bin and Suki stood in front of the giant ballistae, the swords in their hands constantly swinging down, firing one giant ballista bolt after another. The two of them were the best ballista commanders of the Tang dynasty's reinforcements. In just a short period of time, the two of them had completely grasped how to use the giant ballistae. Not only that, the two of them had also refined the reloading of the giant ballistae, greatly reducing the critical reloading time. Release! Release! One ballista bolt after another flew out. The power of the two giant ballistae was on a completely different level from when they were dealing with the hippopotamus behemoth. Under the barrage of the two giant ballistae, the last black boar-like behemoth's aura of life was quickly weakened to an unbelievable degree. These damn bastards! I'll definitely tear you to pieces. Mazel's heart trembled at the sight of his destroyer, being heavily wounded by 4 Tang experts and 2 giant ballistae. His face contorted in rage. His face contorted into a savage grimace. Hurry and summon the destroyer back for me. Mazel turned around and barked at a terrified servant behind him. Although he was very unwilling, each of these behemoths had been his blood, sweat, and tears. The terrorizer was already dead, and Mazel could not sit by and watch as the other behemoth was killed by the Tang people. Whistle! Whistle! A few moments later, a sharp and piercing whistle came from the Arab camp. In the distance, the black boar-like behemoth in front of Talas paused and turned its head in the direction of the Arab camp. Boom! After only a few moments of hesitation, the illustrious destroyer of Arabia pushed aside 3 people and began to madly charge out of the encirclement. Beast! Don't you think it's too late to think about running now? Behind the steel defense line, Chen Bin and Suki sneered at this sight. If the Arabs had called back this black boar-like behemoth at the very beginning, they might not have been able to do anything. But at this point, the behemoth's head had been struck by 20 to 30 arrows, and each of them had been driven deep into its skull by Wang Chong's metal cudgel. In these circumstances, even a behemoth with such tenacious vitality was on the verge of death. Boom boom! Chen Bin and Suki swung their swords, and 2 ballista bolts struck the behemoth's head like lightning bolts. The behemoth moved with incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, it had crossed 50 zhang. Boom boom! Another 2 bolts struck its head. 70 zhang. A third volley, rumble. 150 zhang. Another 2 arrows were shot out. This time, the black boar-like beast let out a long howl, but it was unable to charge forward. Its huge body fell heavily to the ground, raising a cloud of dust. The battle was over. Everything returned to silence. The entire battlefield was absolutely silent. The first to erupt into cheers came from the Tang dynasty soldiers in the city of Talas. The enormous pressure that had been weighing down on their heads had finally vanished. Victory! We've won! The soldiers and mercenaries of the Tang dynasty fiercely waved their fists, their faces red with excitement. The Tang dynasty had used the corpses of these 3 behemoths to once more prove its strength to all its enemies. More importantly, the army finally had weapons that could deal with these behemoths. The 100,000 soldiers finally had the capital to survive on the battlefield. It's over. The Arab behemoths are no longer a threat to them. In the end, we'll have to take the field. The celestial wolf great general Wuxia stood on the high hill, indifferently blinking, his eyes filled with disappointment. He had been very hopeful about the Arab behemoths, but now that the giant ballistae had appeared, there was no longer any suspense. Now that the Tang dynasty had the weapons to contend against the Arabs, the behemoths were no longer much of a threat. It's still too early to make a conclusion. Wuxia had already turned around and was walking toward the army, but when he heard these words, he stopped and gave Dalawan Ruozan a confused look. Haha, has General not noticed? The Tang people's defense line has already been completely opened. Dalawan Ruozan had a relaxed expression on his face, but when Wuxia heard these words, his body trembled, and he turned to look at the first defense line in front of Talis. In this battle, everyone was focused on the massive bodies of the behemoths. Everyone's attention, including Wuxia's, was focused on the behemoths. As for the two defense lines that the Tang dynasty had erected in front of Talis, no one paid much attention to them. Buzz! As his gaze swept over the first defense line of the Tang dynasty, Wuxia's pupils constricted like they had been pricked by a needle. When Wuxia had first seen the first defense line in front of the city of Talis, it had been straight and sturdy, providing the Tang dynasty with a powerful line of defense and lifeline. But now, when Wuxia looked again, he saw that at some point, this long and majestic defense line had become crooked, with a large gap in it. Wuxia estimated that this gap, which had been battered and twisted, was at least 1,000 feet long. Such a large gap was extremely fatal in a battle between armies. Simply put, the Arabs could abandon the rest of the steel walls and attack through that gap. From a certain perspective, the first defense line only existed in name. The Tang dynasty had lost its most important defense line against the Arabs. To put it simply, the Tang dynasty was in a crisis. How could this be? Wuxia took in a deep breath, not daring to believe his eyes. He remembered that when the first Arabian behemoth had appeared, it hadn't caused much of an impact. The Tang dynasty had only lost around 10,000 soldiers to kill it. Although a gap had appeared in the defense line, it hadn't been very large. As for the second behemoth, it had been even stronger, but it had only existed for a very short period of time. Before it could display its destructive power, it had been killed by that brat of the Tang dynasty, who had used his god avatar and giant ballistae. As for that black boar-like behemoth, although it had attacked the city at an extremely fast rate, even cracking the walls, Talis had still managed to stand. Thus, in this aspect, the Arab operation had been a complete failure. Wuxia had no idea when this massive destruction had occurred. When did this happen? Wuxia couldn't help but ask. Haha, in truth, it was already here at the very beginning. All of you were only paying attention to the battle between the behemoth and Wang Chong, not paying any attention to what was happening on the ground. The behemoth attacking the defense line was far more powerful than they had imagined. None of you have noticed, but its strongest attack is actually not its body, but its 4 thick limbs and sawls. Dalawan Ruozan faintly smiled. His eyes were on all sides, and his ears were on all sides. Not only did he have to pay attention to the big picture, he also had to pay attention to the small things that ordinary people would not pay attention to. This was what a top-notch strategist should do. Chapter 967. Let alone Wuxia, even Hueshu Wuzong and Dusong Mangpoj were stunned by Dalawan Ruozan's words. Without a doubt, just like Wuxia, they didn't notice this at all. Dalawan Ruozan took in everyone's reactions and smiled without saying a word. In this war, he had seen much more than Wuxia and Hueshu Wuzong. Although the behemoth is dead and the Tang dynasty has the heavy weapons to deal with the behemoth, this war is far from over. Abu Muslim is the most powerful and ambitious governor of the East in the history of the Arabian Empire, the one who has conquered the most countries. He can't possibly not have a plan, and he can't possibly allow this war to end like this. Dalawan Ruozan's eyes were as bright as snow, revealing a penetrating look. It seemed that in this war, nothing could escape his calculations. This was the bearing of a wise general. Even the heavenly wolf General Wuxia, who was about to leave, could not help but stop when he heard Dalawan Ruozen's words. He turned around and returned to the top of the hill. In just over a day, even Wuxia didn't realize that he had developed a deep trust in this wise foreign prime minister. Although the Tang people's giant ballistae look powerful, they are only useful against large targets like giant beasts. Against ordinary soldiers, it was like a catapult. Although it looked imposing, its true lethality was extremely limited. Moreover, no matter how many giant beasts died, I believe that Abu Muslim should have achieved his goal. The Tang people's defense line has been completely opened for them. Dalawan Ruozen spoke slowly and calmly. There was a strong confidence in his words and actions. Also, if my judgment is correct, the people of the Tang dynasty should only have these 2 giant ballistae, or at most 3, no more. Moreover, they must have been hastily assembled. Otherwise, they would have used it when the first giant beast appeared. Therefore, the Tang people's crisis is far from over. All was quiet on the hill. Wuxia, Huashu Huaitsong, and Dusong Mangpoj, these 3 great generals, were all dumbfounded. If the Tang dynasty's situation was as Dalawan Ruozen had predicted, then their situation was probably far from good. If that's really the case, doesn't that mean they'll die once the ballista is destroyed? Dusong Mangpoj could not help but ask. Isn't that right? Dalawan Ruozen chuckled, revealing a thought-provoking smile. The first phase of the battle had ended, but it was only now that the war had truly entered its proper rhythm. Dalawan Ruozen knew that the following battle would be much more intense than any of the previous ones. In the distance, the mood in the Arab camp was extremely oppressive. The cheers of the behemoths had vanished long ago. When the last of the black boar behemoths, the destroyer, fell to the ground, the 200,000 Arab soldiers were deathly still, not a single sound coming from them. In the rear of the army, the mood was even more oppressive. All the Arab soldiers were staring at the hunchbacked figure. Even though Mazel was a trusted aide of the Caliph and the commander of the behemoth army, he couldn't help but feel his face turn red and unsightly under this pressure. When he had first arrived, he had been brimming with pride and confidence, believing that the behemoth army he had brought with him could sweep away the infidels of the city of Talis. But in the end, 3 such powerful behemoths died in front of everyone's eyes on the opposite battlefield. How could Mazel maintain his composure? More importantly, Mazel and the behemoth army represented the Caliph, one of the strongest forces of the Arabian Empire. This sort of result had undoubtedly shamed both the empire and the Caliph. This was an accident. I also didn't know that something like this would happen. The reports you gave me didn't mention that the enemy had these giant ballistae. This sort of thing has never happened before. Mazel finally couldn't help but argue. No one said anything, but their gazes were enough to explain the problem. Arabia was a country of war, a country of conquest. What it worshipped the most was strength. Without strength that could convince others, even a trusted aide of the Caliph would be useless. If Mazel had been able to subdue his foe and destroy that fortress, then even if he was a hunchback, everyone would still respect him. But there was no doubt that he had messed up. Enough! Abu Muslim finally spoke. In the entire army, he and Ziyad were probably the only people who did not blame Mazel. The 2 of them looked past the army to the other side. This battle was not Mazel's fault. Moreover, even though the behemoths are dead, Mazel has already helped us accomplish our goal and open the Tang dynasty's defense line. Now it is our turn to attack. With these final words, Abu Muslim's eyes flashed with an astonishing cold light. His gaze swept through the air toward the long steel defense line in the distance, immediately locking onto the gap in the wall, which was more than 1,000 feet long. Pass on my order. All soldiers get ready. In addition, have the last army prepare to attack. Boom! A long horn blared from the Arab army, resounding over the entire western battlefield. What is this? In the distance, the Tang dynasty reinforcements, who were still dealing with the aftermath of the battle, raised their heads in shock at the sound of the horn. After 2 rounds of battle, no matter what happened on the Arab side, any movement or change would attract the attention of the entire army. But this was not the only thing that shocked them. In all their battles with the Arabs, they had only heard the beating of war drums. They had never heard the horn blaring from the Arab camp. At the same time, in front of the majestic walls of Talas, the four supreme great generals of the Tang dynasty had also been drawn to the horn blaring from the Arab camp. What's going on? Are the Arabs going to attack again so soon? Cheng Qianli turned his head and looked into the distance, and his eyes were filled with astonishment. I don't know. The Arabs rarely use the horn. I have a bad feeling. This time, they'll be even more difficult to deal with than the behemoth army. Gao Xinji stood on the left shoulder of the supreme desolation god, his expression extremely grave, as he watched the Arab army rapidly gathering into square formations and exuding a somber aura. Abu Muslim is preparing to personally attack. It was at this moment that a calm voice rang out in everyone's ears. In an instant, everyone's gazes landed on the young, skinny figure. Wang Chong, Gao Xinji, Cheng Qianli, and Wang Chong's father Wang Yin all turned their heads to the nearby Wang Chong, confusion and shock on their faces. Abu Muslim has already achieved his goal. Our strength has already been weakened, and more importantly, he's already smashed through our defense line. With these final words, Wang Chong turned his head to the long gap in the first defense line. There was no need for Wang Chong's order. All the craftsmen had begun to move the moment the first defense line was broken. Hundreds of furnaces spat out flames from the long gap, but the effect was extremely slow. The hippopotamus-shaped beast not only destroyed the steel walls, but also threw them all over the place. More importantly, it completely changed the terrain of the area. The steel walls were easy to repair, but the shattered terrain was not. At the very least, it could not be repaired in a short period of time. The area in front of Talas fell silent. As they stared at the long gap, the top-class generals of the Tang dynasty fell silent, their expressions extremely grave. When it rains, it pours. In these two waves of attacks from the behemoth, the Tang dynasty had lost more than 10,000 soldiers, their defense line shattered. Even Gao Xinji, Cheng Qianli, Wang Yan, and even Wang Chong had consumed a great deal of mental energy, physical strength, and stellar energy. None of them had even caught their breath from the battle. If Abu Muslim were to launch an attack with an army of 200,000 soldiers and personally take action, it would be a nightmare for all of them. At a time like this, the only person who could maintain his composure was Wang Chong, but the waves in his heart were far more intense than anyone else's. That horn, is it the Skyquaking army? Wang Chong's mind was in turmoil as he stared in the direction the horn had come from. Gao Xinji and Cheng Qianli had not recognized it, but Wang Chong had recognized it the moment the horn had sounded. It was the horn of the Skyquaking army. The Arabs did not use horns. Only a special army in the Arabian Empire would use them. The Skyquaking army. Is it finally about to begin? Wang Chong mentally muttered to himself. In his last life, Wang Chong had never participated in the Battle of Talas, but Wang Chong knew all the details of this battle by heart. The Skyquaking army was the formidable force that had shaken everyone on this battlefield. This was not the first time Wang Chong had encountered this force. It had appeared in the War of the Southwest. 6 to 7 meters tall, sometimes even 10 some meters, had inflicted enormous damage to Wang Chong's soldiers. At the time, they had only been called the Giant Army, but Wang Chong was well aware that this force was completely different from last time. This was the true Skyquaking army, a violent, destructive, and terrifying army. Chapter 968. Li Sai, pass on my order. Gather the army and prepare for battle. Wang Chong's eyes flashed as he suddenly ordered. Yes, Marquis, Li Sai deferentially replied from atop his Fergana horse. Hiya! With a shout, he ordered the Wuxian cavalry behind him to gallop toward the defense line. Lord Protector General, let's go! At almost the same time, Wang Chong dispelled his Yama Devil avatar. With a battle at hand, Wang Chong could sense that it would be a fierce battle. Gao Xinji nodded and rode toward the defense line. Rumble! In the distance, the blaring of the horns had stopped, but the quaking of the earth was only intensifying. As the 200,000 Arab soldiers gathered and prepared for battle, they exuded an aura that seemed capable of toppling mountains and overturning seas. Just by looking at it from afar, one could already feel a suffocating pressure. Roar! Countless Arab cavalry roared, all of them waving their scimitars that reflected a cold light in the sunlight. Tens of thousands of scimitars pointed into the sky, creating a dazzling forest of scimitars. The Arabs have finally moved out. In the distance, the Western Turks and the Uzun were also watching the tens of thousands of Arabs on the horizon, their shouts shaking the heavens. Dalawan Ruozan and the others had calm expressions, but their eyes were much brighter. After waiting for so long, the Arabs had finally decided to move out. Although the power of the behemoths was astonishing, in the end, in order to destroy the nearly 100,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty, they would still need soldiers on the ground. I wonder if the Arabs can completely crush the Tang people. Wuxia Wuzong muttered to himself, a hint of anticipation in his eyes as he gazed at the vast Arab army. In terms of cavalry charging and breaking through defenses, no one in the world could surpass the Arabs. Even the proud Uzun had to admit their inferiority in this aspect. In terms of positional warfare and infantry defense, no one in the world could surpass the Tang people. Other than the Tang dynasty, there was probably no other empire or faction that could use purely infantry defensive techniques to block the storm of attacks from the fiercest Arab cavalry in the world. The Tang dynasty dominated with infantry, while Arabia contended for hegemony with cavalry. These were the two most powerful empires of the East and West, the most representative of their armies. But now the situation had changed. The steel defense line built by the Tang dynasty was beginning to crack. A gap of more than 1,000 zhang was more than enough for the Arab cavalry to bypass the defense line and charge straight into the heart of the Tang dynasty. The Arabs already possessed the ability to completely crush the Tang dynasty. The Tang dynasty still wants to repair it, but it's already too late. There's no time to repair a gap of more than 1,000 zhang. The Tang dynasty's loss is certain. A voice came from Shusha. Huoba Senji was riding a highland steed, also observing the battle from the hills. Behind him were several thousand Mutri great cavalry. It's just a little regretful. It seems like the Tang dynasty's Wushang cavalry won't die at our hands. But to be able to see them die on the battlefield, to see them completely wiped out, is at least a consolation to the White Braves and Qinghai cavalry who were slain by the Tang people. These last words were spoken in a much quieter voice. The army of more than 60,000 Western Turks and Uzun soldiers was silent, all of them waiting for the storm to come. The air was tense. While the vast Arab army was preparing for battle, the countless Tang dynasty soldiers were gathering behind the first defense line. The warriors who had previously retreated into the city to avoid the battle all rushed out at this moment. Row by row, they formed countless distinct phalanxes. In a few short moments, the Tang dynasty had already formed the first defense line, and then the second, the third. In front of the army, Zhang Shoji was busy leading all the craftsmen, doing their best to repair the steel defense line that had been broken by the behemoth. Flames raged and smoke billowed. There was a tense atmosphere everywhere. The Tang dynasty and the Arabs, the two strongest armies of the East and West, were in a distant standoff. Although no battle had yet begun, the tense atmosphere was far more intense than it had been in the past. Rumble. While the great Tang was preparing for war, in the distance, the earth quaked as massive black silhouettes began to walk forward from the rear of the Arab camp, blocking out the sun and obscuring the sky. An enormous pressure that was like a flood penetrated through the layers of space and pressed down towards them. Buzz! Seeing this scene, everyone's expression changed in an instant. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 massive behemoths were moving in the distance, heading toward the great Tang camp. How could this be? How could the Arabs have so many behemoths? A cry of alarm came from the camp. Banahan Chief Banahan couldn't help but grimace at this sight. Although the other soldiers who saw it didn't say anything, their reactions had already explained everything. This should be all their soldiers, Wang Chong calmly said as he rode his horse to Banahan's side. A gust of wind stirred in Wang Chong's eyes, but they were as determined as ever. Wang Chong understood far more about the behemoth army than anyone else present. Since it was an army, it wasn't just one. If the first 2 times could be said to have been the enemy's probing and disdain, then this time, the enemy commander had cast aside all disdain and placed 120% of his attention. It's said that in all of Arab history, the behemoth army has never sent out more than 2 behemoths at once, but this time, they've sent out 4 at once. This truly is our honor. Wang Chong inwardly sneered. To any faction, the behemoth army was a terrifying force that could sweep through all. Their existence had always made one think of those unfathomable myths, even though the behemoth army actually had little to do with those myths. The 4 behemoths were still an enormous pressure on Wang Chong. But now that he had 2 giant ballistae that could restrain the behemoths, Wang Chong had a much easier time. At the very least, the behemoths were no longer invincible existences. Boom! A row of 4 behemoths, towering like mountains, began to advance. But when they were still 10-some zhang from the front of the Arab army, the 4 behemoths suddenly stopped, motionless on the ground. The rest of the Arab army also seemed to be frozen in place. This scene was so sudden that it caused everyone to be taken aback. Marquis, the Arabs have already blown the horns, so why have they suddenly stopped? Just what are the Arabs waiting for? Xue Qianjun looked away in shock, subconsciously turning to Wang Chong on his white-hoofed shadow. All of them had prepared for battle, but the 200,000 Arab soldiers and 4 terrifying behemoths had suddenly stopped. All of them were dumbfounded, unable to understand what was going on. In the howling winds, Wang Chong silently gripped the reins of his horse, countless thoughts flitting through his mind. As he stared at the Arab army, he vaguely thought of something, but he couldn't grasp it in his urgency. Ever since he had intervened in the Battle of Talas, everything had changed from what he remembered. Not even he could predict what would happen next. Silence reigned over the battlefield, but the uneasy atmosphere continued to grow. Are you ready? In the rear of the army, Abu Muslim was like an immovable mountain, but his voice was directed behind him. Lord Governor, everything has been prepared. We now await Milord's order. An abnormally muscular Arab general standing behind Abu Muslim bowed and spoke with unusual deference. Very good. A sharp glint flashed across Abu Muslim's eyes when he heard this. Mazel begin. These last words were chilling and suffused with a somber aura. Roar. As the behemoths roared, the rows of Arab soldiers parted, creating a long path. The 4 immovable behemoths finally took a step forward. Boom. First the first, then the second, then the third. The 4 behemoths roared as they charged at the Tang dynasty. As the behemoths charged forward, everyone could clearly see that the heads of these 4 behemoths were wrapped in a thick layer of armor. Everyone grimaced at this sight. It was clear that the Arabs had learned their lesson from the previous battle and had strengthened the defenses around the most important heads of the behemoths. Ready. Behind the steel defense line, Wang Chong made a gesture, and Chun Bin and Su Qi, the 2 ballista commanders, drew their swords and gave the order. Following their orders, the hundreds of ballista soldiers got to work one after another. Creak, creak. The clattering of metal rang out as the soldiers nervously readied their ballistae and aimed their sharp arrowheads at the behemoth. The Tang dynasty only had 2 giant ballistae, but they were facing 4 behemoths. No one knew if they would be able to take them down. Wang Chong, are there no other giant ballistae in the camp? Can you make a few more? The galloping of hooves could be heard as Go Xianji rode his horse over to stand next to Wang Chong. His eyes were looking forward, a faint hint of worry in them. No. Wang Chong shook his head. The giant ballistae have always been just a concept that has never been tested. It's already a miracle that we can make them and use them as they should. There's no way to make a third in the short term. Chapter 969. Marquis, in truth, with our current conditions, it's still possible to make another one. At this moment, an elderly voice came from behind them. The 4 of them turned their gazes to Zhang Shouji, who was standing behind them. The greatest problem with the giant ballistae is that we don't have the experience, and that the materials used are special, which is why we weren't confident in making them. But now that we've made one, we have experience that we can rely on. Although making a third one will still be extremely difficult, with enough time, it's possible. Moreover, the ballistae that were destroyed earlier are ready-made materials. We can also forge the other parts on the spot. As for the ballista bolts, they're also very easy to deal with. With these last words, Zhang Shouji turned his head to the first defense line, where the Arabian behemoths had been shot down. The ballista bolts used by the giant ballistae were different from the others. They had basically all been forged by Zhang Shouji and the others in the capital, gathering the best craftsmen and grandmasters of the various smithing clans, and using the best techniques and materials. In the final forging process, a large number of formations and inscriptions had been added to the ballistae. Only in this way could these giant ballista bolts pierce through the tough and elastic skin of the behemoths, and pierce through their steel-like bones. This was not something that could be casually forged on the battlefield. But these precious giant ballistae bolts were actually the least of Wang Chang's worries. Understood. On the other side, Cheng Qianli, the Vice Protector General of the Anxi Protectorate Army, had a sharp light in his eyes. He suddenly squeezed the horse's abdomen, and without saying a word, he immediately urged the horse to gallop towards the nearest rhino-shaped beast's corpse. Arriving in front of the gigantic beast, Cheng Qianli leaped onto its head. Pooh! Cheng Qianli bent down and pulled forcefully, pulling out a bloody and heavy giant crossbow bolt from the gigantic beast's head. Boom! Cheng Qianli raised the giant ballista bolt, as if it were light, and threw it with all his might. The giant ballista bolt landed not far from one of the giant ballistae, causing a cloud of dust to rise into the air. One after another he threw them over. Each of these giant crossbow bolts was extremely heavy. Other than a top-notch general like Cheng Qianli, it would be very difficult for others to pull them out. With Cheng Qianli's help, they managed to retrieve 30 to 40 giant crossbow bolts in a short period of time. All of the heavy ballistae bolts were pulled out and stacked next to the two giant ballistae. Dong! 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 At this moment, war drums began to beat from the Arab camp. Not long after the four behemoths began to charge, the 200,000 Arab cavalry suddenly began to move. Like a black tide, they followed the behemoths and charged toward the Tang people's defense line. Kill! Destroy them! Kill these heathens! Battle cries shook the heavens and the earth, and accompanied by the thumping of the war drums, a violent, ferocious, and murderous aura whistled over like an avalanche. The war had finally begun. Ready! In the gloomy sky, a loud voice resounded over the defense line. Clang, clang, clang. Swords were unsheathed and gleaming in the air. Shield soldiers, get ready. Ballistae, get into position. Cavalry, assume formation. Military orders were issued one after another, clear and unambiguous, from top to bottom, constantly spreading throughout the entire army. In a flash, the more than 100,000 soldiers of the Qixi Protectorate Army and the Anxi Protectorate Army began to move. The sounds of footsteps, armor clanking, swords clanking, shields vibrating, and the sound of the furnace forging merged into one. The Tang Dynasty army was like an enormous machine, and a powerful energy instantly engulfed the entire Tang Dynasty army. The battlefield was so somber that even the distant Uzan and Western Turks were affected. All of them were so focused and nervous that they almost forgot to breathe. Mazel, get ready. You should move out as well. In the distance, Abu Muslim stared at the Tang Dynasty defense line and suddenly ordered without turning his head. Heh, understood. Mazel seemed to have predicted this, and as he looked at the distant Tang Dynasty defense line, he gave a sinister smile and began to walk to the rear. A few moments later, a fissure opened up in the ground, and Mazel vanished into it. Roar! The giant beasts roared, and the rumbling footsteps shook the earth and the sky. They were getting closer and closer to the army and the first line of defense. Their heavy bodies stomped on the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust that was more than 10 meters high. Behind the behemoths, the Arab cavalry waved their scimitars and surged forward like a flood. 3,000 zhang, 25,000 zhang, The four behemoths, and the vast sea of Arab cavalry charged at the Tang people's defense line. All soldiers get ready. Li Sai led the 5,000 Wuxiang cavalry to the very front of the defense line, his thunderous voice echoing in everyone's ears. Nervous. Incomparably nervous. The tension between the two armies had multiplied. Whether it was the Arabs, the Tang people, or the mercenaries, all of them were staring at each other, their hands gripping their weapons so tightly that the veins on their arms bulged. At this moment, even Wang Chong and Gao Xianji appeared a little nervous. The decisive battle between the Arabs and the Tang dynasty was probably about to begin. Ballista army. When the Arabs and behemoths were still 2,000 zhang from the defense line, Wang Chong unsheathed his sword and gave the order. In an instant, the creaking sounds of machinery rose and fell incessantly in the ears of everyone present. The 3,000 ballistae were all knocked and aimed at the enemy, the only force that could pose a threat to both the Arab cavalry and the behemoths was the ballista army. Although they could not deal as much damage as the giant ballistae, they had the advantage in numbers, and they were still effective in this battle. But just when all 3,000 ballistae had been loaded, there was a massive boom. Behind the Arab army, on the distant horizon, the ground suddenly quaked as if something had just exploded. Translated by Hypersheep 325. The commotion was so great that it was accompanied by a series of changes in light and shadow. In an instant, it quickly attracted everyone's attention. What's that? At the front of the defense line, Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, and Cheng Qianli stood shoulder to shoulder. Cheng Qianli narrowed his eyes at this sight. Wang Chong and Gao Xianji said nothing, but both of them had an ill foreboding. No matter what that explosion was, for it to appear at a time like this was not a good thing. Hua! Suddenly, the crowd fell into an uproar. The confusion of the army did not last for long before the answer was quickly revealed. Look over there. What's that? A meteor. It's a meteor. As the Tang soldiers watched in shock, a massive meteor, blazing with dark green flames, began to tumble through the air as it hurtled toward the Tang soldiers. By the time the Tang soldiers noticed it, it was only several hundred zhang from their heads. Careful! Wang Chong's pupils constricted as an intense sense of danger welled up in his heart. This scene was far too bizarre, and not even Wang Chong had predicted it. But even though Wang Chong had warned them, it was too late. Boom! In the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint, there was an earth-shattering boom. The huge, burning meteorite flew through the air for hundreds of meters and smashed heavily into the ground. Ah! A series of miserable screams rang out as the meteors crashed into the ground, triggering an earth-shattering explosion. The shockwaves sent many Tang soldiers and Western regions mercenaries flying with their horses. Countless pieces of rubble shot out in all directions like sharp arrows under the influence of the shockwaves. Nay! The warhorses neighed, and countless warhorses' eyes widened as they retreated in terror. The meteors continued to fall, and the army was thrown into chaos. Right in the middle of these warhorses was a huge crater. The crater had a diameter of more than 10 meters, and the core area was 6 to 7 meters deep. At the deepest part of the crater was a giant egg. The egg was dark green, and was 5 or 6 people tall. Its mottled surface appeared to be made of some kind of tough metal, and it was burning with dark green flames. Kacha! A series of crisp sounds came from the giant egg. The moment it hit the ground, the dark green egg, which had been mistaken for a meteor, immediately cracked into tiny black cracks. Boom! Before anyone could react, a huge hand that looked like dark steel suddenly reached out from inside and grabbed the edge of the crack. Ha ha ha, all of you die. A cold and tyrannical voice, accompanied by a strong murderous aura, suddenly rang in everyone's ears. At that moment, everyone saw clearly that the hand that reached out from inside the egg was actually bigger than a horse. And behind the egg, there was a pair of scarlet and terrifying eyes. Ah! There were cries of alarm all around. Countless warhorses seemed to be greatly frightened and retreated, neighing in fear. In the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint, under everyone's horrified gazes, the giant egg split open. Amidst the clanging sounds of steel, a pitch-black giant that looked like steel rose from within the giant egg. 10 meters, 15 meters, 17 meters. In the end, the giant's height stopped at 18 meters. With dark brown steel-like skin, a tall and mighty body, and a pair of tyrannical, evil and destructive eyes. This was an ancient giant in myths and legends. And the mottled green eggshell was the giant's armor. Boom! Chapter 970. Ha ha ha, you damned ants. All of you can die for me. Waves of ferocious laughter reverberated above the army. Bang! At the same time that the boulder was thrown, the giant leaped out of the huge hole in the ground like an agile monkey. Boom! The two steel-like black arms swung up like a wheel and swept fiercely. Boom! 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 Before anyone could react, they heard a series of miserable screams. At the edge of the pit, the 20 to 30 Tang Dynasty cavalry were caught off guard and sent flying like ragdolls. The green-armored giant that descended from the sky did not stop at all. He leaped forward and grabbed a huge green shield that was taller than a person. He swept it back and forth, throwing and sending all the soldiers in front of him flying. Organize the defense line. Careful. Surround him with all your strength. This scene was so sudden that the troops around the pit were thrown into chaos. Countless soldiers from the Tang Dynasty, Greater and Lesser Balor, and the mercenary tribes of the western regions charged forward. But before this terrifying giant, they couldn't even take a single blow. Rumble! Soldier after soldier, squad after squad, row after row, countless soldiers were swept up like leaves and dust in a sweep, swept away by the 18-meter-tall giant. As countless people watched, the giant advanced by leaps and bounds, invincible as it slaughtered its way through the army. From the moment the meteor fell to the giant's slaughter, the Tang Dynasty had lost at least 100 soldiers. Let alone the soldiers, even the distant generals Gao Xianji, Wang Chong, and Cheng Qianli paled. Chen Bin! Ballisti! A furious roar came from the front of the defense line. The sight of this invincible giant made Wang Chong's face pale, and his heart sink. The sky-quaking giant, even though none of the surrounding soldiers, including the general in charge, knew where the giant came from, they were all shocked. But Wang Chong immediately recognized it as the famous sky-quaking army that the Arabs had used in the Battle of Talas. Wang Chong had not been surprised by the appearance of the sky-quaking giants. But Wang Chong had never imagined that the sky-quaking giants would appear on the battlefield of Talas like this. More importantly, there had never been just one sky-quaking giant, but an entire army. This also meant that Hua! Look, not good. Run! As if in response to Wang Chong's thoughts, boom boom boom, the earth quaked and rocks and dirt shot out in all directions. Amidst the chaos, giant asteroids blazing with dark green flames began to fall from the sky, smashing into various parts of the army with lightning-fast speed. Roar! Amidst the explosions, the towering sky-quaking giants roared and raised their arms as they rose from the giant eggs with the momentum of holding up the heavens. This fierce, tyrannical, and frenzied energy was like a storm that shook every Tang Dynasty soldier. Kill them! Savage roars resounded through the steel defense line as the sky-quaking giants began to speak in Arabic. Boom! As if receiving some sort of signal, the sky-quaking giants scattered throughout the army began to move. Boom boom boom. One towering sky-quaking giant after another rose from the ground. The moment they appeared, they madly attacked the Tang Dynasty soldiers in front of them, all of them madly galloping toward the same destination. Ah! A scream rang out as a Tang Dynasty horseman was caught off guard and struck by a black iron palm. Both he and his horse flew more than 100 feet into the air before crashing to the ground several dozen feet away. In that instant, everyone could clearly see that the palms of the giants, when spread open, were actually larger than a horse. Get out of my way! At the same time, another giant kicked out with his foot. Whoosh! 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 Some cavalry were sent flying into the air. In a few short moments, 7 or 8 sky-quaking giants had thrown the Tang Dynasty formation into chaos. Bang! A massive black ballista bolt flew through the air, shooting toward a sky-quaking giant. But in a flash of light, There was a boom as the dark green shield in the skyquaking giant's hand blocked that ballista bolt that could destroy all obstacles, and was the nightmare of cavalry. Careful of those ballista soldiers! Kill them! The skyquaking giant stomped a foot on a corpse and gave a heaven-shaking roar. Boom! Before anyone could react, the giant suddenly bent down, grabbed a robust horse corpse, and tossed it over fiercely. There was a massive boom, and an explosion of energy, as a ballista several dozen zhang away was struck by the corpse of a horse. The ballista and 5 ballista soldiers screamed as they were thrown into the air. With this skyquaking giant's example, the other giants began to follow suit. They grabbed whatever they could use around them, boulders, human corpses, horse corpses, and threw them over. Boom boom boom. One important ballista after another of the Tang dynasty's ballistae was smashed to pieces, and the ballista soldiers suffered grievous losses. And this was only the prelude. One skyquaking giant after another curled up into a ball of burning dark green eggs that were hurled down from the sky by the catapults. 20, 30, 50. The skyquaking giants fell like meteors, covering almost the entire army. Roar! Roar! The savage roars of the giants resounded through the sky as the situation suddenly became extremely grim, extremely disadvantageous to the Tang dynasty. Not only that, as these giants attacked the Tang soldiers, they were also rapidly moving in the same direction, running with large strides. Not good. Their target is the giant ballistae. A worried voice rang out in everyone's ears. As the commanders of the ballista army, and the true controllers of the 2 giant ballistae, Chun Bin and Sukhi were the first to notice that something was wrong. From their vantage point, all of the giants, no matter where they had fallen, began to approach the 2 giant ballistae the moment they rose to their feet. The giant ballistae were no longer simple weapons or armaments. Although the city of Talas had around 100,000 soldiers, these 2 giant ballistae were the only weapons other than Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, Wang Yan, and Qing Qianli that could harm the 4 behemoths. From a certain perspective, they were even more effective than the attacks of great generals. Without these 2 giant ballistae, the Tang dynasty would be in grave danger. It was clear that the Arabs had realized this, which was why they had dropped the giants over to attack the giant ballistae. Stop them. Protect the giant ballistae. Don't let them get close. The giants aren't invincible. Everyone, get into formation and work together to deal with them. A series of shouts rang out from all directions. With the giants at the center, the surrounding infantry, cavalry, archers, axemen, all the soldiers began to move. Everyone was well aware of the importance of the giant ballistae to the army, so the moment they understood the giants' goal, all the soldiers went into a frenzy. Although the giants were extremely strong, and could even pick up a horse with their 5 fingers, the giants were still considered humans, and all the cavalry that gathered here were not ordinary cavalry. Tens of thousands of cavalry gathered together could even deal with a great general, let alone a few giants. Kill! Amidst the earth-shattering battle cries, waves of soldiers rushed towards the giants like a tidal wave. At the same time, at least half of the 3,000 ballistae turned to aim at the skyquaking giants within the defense line. Boom boom boom. Long black ballista bolts flew through the air like dragons at the skyquaking giants. Roar! Defend! A skyquaking giant with a thick red beard suddenly bellowed. Bzzz. The charging skyquaking giants suddenly slowed down and took up defensive stances. Bzzz. The charging skyquaking giants suddenly slowed down and took up defensive stances. Bang bang bang. The long ballista bolts shot forward like lightning bolts, but the skyquaking giants used their dark green armor to block them. Plush. On the outermost edge of the battlefield, a skyquaking giant was caught off guard, and a long ballista bolt pierced through a chink in his armor and into his chest. But the skyquaking giant acted as if nothing had happened. His right hand grabbed the end of the bolt and pulled, tearing out a large chunk of flesh and skin. An ordinary human would have died from such an attack, but the skyquaking giants were only slightly weakened, the flames of life still burning in their bodies. Although the skyquaking giants could not compare to the behemoths in terms of vitality, they were still extremely powerful. Split up. split into 3 groups to deal with the ballistae. The rest of you, get rid of those 2 ballistae. The red-bearded giant bared his teeth and savagely roared as he swiftly took up a countermeasure. To the astonishment of everyone, these seemingly brawny and simple-minded skyquaking giants began to work together under the command of the red-bearded giant. A group of skyquaking giants bent their knees and raised their shields, using their armor to block the attacks, while using the rocks and corpses around them to fire back at the ballistae. At the same time, they swept away the Tang soldiers charging at them. Screams and flesh flew through the air. Each skyquaking giant was a killing machine, constantly killing the Tang dynasty soldiers around them. Chapter 971. There's no time. We can't let them destroy the giant ballistae. Chen Bin, let's work together and use the giant ballistae to sweep them away. The howling winds caused the armor on Suki's body to clatter. The pale Suki suddenly turned his head to the nearby Chen Bin. The giant ballistae were used to deal with the Arabian behemoths, and each one was extremely precious. If the behemoths did not completely die because of a lack of effective fire, then once the behemoths went berserk, they would definitely kill more soldiers than the giants. But in the current situation, the 2 of them had no other choice. Once the giant ballistae were destroyed, there would be nothing left. At the same time, Chen Bin stood in front of the giant ballistae and firmly nodded. We'll do as you say. At this moment, the 2 of them quickly reached an agreement. Creak creak. The giant ballistae that had been aimed at the 4 behemoths suddenly began to slowly and heavily adjust their angle, aiming their giant bolts at the 2 skyquaking giants closest to them. Bang! Bang! 2 giant ballista bolts more than 10 meters long flew through the air, piercing through the dark green armor of a skyquaking giant. The enormous force of the bolts pierced through the skyquaking giant's body, sending it flying into the air, where it was already a corpse. At almost the same time, another scream came from nearby, as another skyquaking giant was shot to death by the giant ballista. These skyquaking giants possessed unimaginable vitality and defensive power, capable of single-handedly defeating an army of several hundred, but they were still extremely weak against the terrifying giant ballistae. Buzz! The moment the 2 skyquaking giants were killed by the giant ballistae, the entire battlefield fell silent. All the giants looked in the same direction, their eyes brimming with shock. All the giants possessed terrifying strength, speed, and dexterity, as well as extremely tough and sturdy bodies. Even if they dropped from the sky, they wouldn't be harmed. In their understanding, there was no such thing as a natural enemy. Moreover, ever since the establishment of this army, not a single giant had ever died in battle. This was the first time something like this had happened. But this silence did not last for long. Soon after, the earth quaked and the heavens swayed. Another batch of skyquaking giants crashed to the ground like raindrops. The Arabs were using this method to throw one skyquaking giant after another at the Tang dynasty. Kill! With a furious roar, all the skyquaking giants reinvigorated and once more charged toward the giant ballistae, as if their lives depended on it. Release! The ballista bolts boomed as Chen Bin and Suki swung their swords, directing the 2 giant ballistae to fire at the surrounding skyquaking giants. But the time it took for the giant ballistae to fire had become a fatal flaw. Air surged as the skyquaking giants approached. The Tang dynasty's dire situation was not just this. As the giants of the skyquaking army continued to descend from the sky and attack the 2 giant ballistae, the Tang dynasty's defense line was in turmoil, the 4 Arabian behemoths roaring in the distance. They were now less than 1,000 zhang from the first defense line of the city of Talas. Behind the behemoths, the 200,000 Arab soldiers roared as they surged forward like an avalanche. Beset by enemies from within and without, the 100,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty were suddenly plunged into an unprecedented predicament. Li Sai! In the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint, a young and calm voice suddenly sounded in everyone's ears. This voice seemed to possess a unique charm that made people involuntarily believe in it. It also caused the originally chaotic army to suddenly calm down. Wang Chong stood in front of the defense line, taking in all of this. Although he appeared calm on the surface, his mind was in turmoil, an invisible pressure surging toward him from all sides. Only Wang Chong knew how much pressure he was under, but he could not reveal any of it. Take all the Wuxian cavalry, and immediately return to the defense line. Kill all the skyquaking giants. I'll leave it all to you. This general will go. In this desperate situation, Li Sai clenched his teeth and urged his horse to charge at the skyquaking giants. Everyone follow me. The 5,000 Wuxian cavalry silently followed Li Sai like the guards of the god of death, as they charged at the skyquaking giants. 100 to each group. Quickly scatter. As they charged, Li Sai's deputy Kong Xian shouted. The dense ranks of Wuxian cavalry quickly divided into 50-100-man groups that charged at the nearest skyquaking giants. The Wuxian cavalry were the strongest in the army, and they could only be relied on to deal with the skyquaking giants. Even after all this was done, Wang Chong did not relax in the slightest. His eyes were sharp and dazzling, even more dazzling than the sun. He abruptly raised his head to look at the sky, and his dazzling eyes instantly became incomparably deep. Rumble! At the end of Wang Chong's vision, one skyquaking giant after another fell like meteors toward the Tang dynasty. All these dark green meteors were reflected in Wang Chong's eyes, and at this moment, Wang Chong's mind began to rapidly calculate. Elder Fong, Elder Du, I need your cooperation. To the southwest, the 4 symbols Yin-Yang Soul Trap can position. Hurry! These words were so sudden that even Anqi Vice Protector General Chung Qianli, who was standing next to Wang Chong, was taken aback. However, there were 2 people who were not. Marquis understood. Leave this matter to us. 2 figures, with their sleeves fluttering in the wind, suddenly opened their arms like huge birds and leaped out from the army. While they were still in the air, they grabbed 2 large, heavy pieces of steel and threw them into the distance. Clang, clang, clang. One piece of steel after another flew into the air and plunged into the ground. Both Elder Fong and Elder Du were Saint Martial experts of Wuxiang village, and in the blink of an eye, they had used these pieces of steel to lay down a massive 4 symbols Yin-Yang Soul Trap. Boom! Almost at the same time that the 2 of them laid out the 4 symbols Yin-Yang Soul Trap, a huge meteorite fell from the sky, smashing heavily into the center of the formation. Roar! With a heaven-shaking roar, the dark green meteor split open, and a skyquaking giant with a storm of energy rose from the formation, waving his arms. But just when he was about to begin a massacre in the army, he suddenly saw the situation around him, and his roar came to a sudden stop. The giant was dumbfounded. Outside the formation, Elder Fong and Elder Du saw this sight, and immediately understood what was going on. To the southwest, the 4 symbols Yin-Yang Soul Trap can position. At this moment, Wang Chong's voice rang out once more. Hurry! In an instant, Elder Fong and Elder Du returned to their senses at the same time. And without another word, they immediately flew in another direction. The 2 Wuxiang village elders finally understood what was going on. Wang Chong was roughly calculating where the giants would fall from the sky, and using the 4 symbols Yin-Yang Soul Trap to trap them. At a time like this truly was the best way to deal with them. To the southeast, Li position. To the northeast, Kuan position. To the east, Dui position. Wang Chong raised his head to the sky, his robes flapping in the wind as he issued one order after another. In the sky above the defensive line, Elder Fong and Elder Du were running back and forth. Their speed was extremely fast, and they were constantly setting up 4 symbols Yin-Yang bewitching arrays on the ground at an astonishing speed. The 4 symbols Yin-Yang Soul Trap was an ancient formation, and while it was somewhat lacking against the massive bodies and terrifying strength of the behemoths, it was more than enough to deal with these skyquaking giants. Roar! Roar! Savage roars rang out from the ground. From the sky, one skyquaking giant after another rose from the ground like meteors, only to be greeted by the sturdy and powerful 4 symbols Yin-Yang Soul Trap. Bum bum bum. Metal clattered as the skyquaking giants madly attacked their surroundings, their steely fists bombarding their surroundings. But all they could see was gray. Under the influence of the formation, these giants couldn't even see the army outside the formation, much less attack. The four symbols yin-yang confusion borrowed the power of the earth around it. So all the attacks these giants launched on the formation itself were no different from hammering the earth. There was no effect at all. One formation after another was swiftly completed on the ground. In a few short moments, nearly 50 skyquaking giants had been trapped in the formations. Damn it! Destroy those things! One of the giants, whose beard and hair were all standing on end, roared furiously. Boom boom boom. Some skyquaking giants immediately began to charge toward the formation. But before they could reach it, the neighing of Nei's horse interrupted their charge. Kill them! Kong Xian raised his sword and led a group of 100 Wuxiang cavalry toward the nearest skyquaking giant. Ignorant ants! At the sight of the Wuxiang cavalry charging at him, this 18-meter-tall giant gave a savage laugh. Instead of dodging, he threw out a grayish-brown rock. At the same time, he swung his steely palm at the nearest Wuxiang horseman with astonishing speed and power. This palm was powerful enough to shatter steel, and even the Wuxiang cavalry would be doomed if struck. Chapter 972. How is this possible? The giant roared in anger, but in the next moment, he was greeted by a searing pain. It was not obvious at first, but in the blink of an eye, the pain multiplied exponentially, and finally, even his bones began to ache. Kill him! An angry roar came from beneath his feet. The giant lowered his head, and only then did he see ant-like human cavalry brushing past his feet like bolts of lightning. These human cavalry were all wielding sharp swords that gleamed with a cold light. The longsword flashed past his ankle and cut through the layer of hard, thick, and dark green armor that was made of the best materials, as if it was cutting a piece of paper. The 3-foot-long blades cut through his skin, his tendons, his flesh, and even his bones. Because they were so sharp, the giant did not feel any pain until the cavalry had already galloped far away. How is this possible? What kind of weapon could cut through my giant god armor? The giant's eyes widened as he stared at the scene in disbelief. He lifted his feet, but a crisp cracking sound came from the soles of his feet. Before he could lift his feet, the soles of his feet could no longer bear the weight of his body. A line of blood appeared, and his ankles immediately snapped. With a rumble, the giant lost his balance. His body went limp, and he fell heavily to his knees, his hands on the ground. My feet, my feet! The giant screamed in pain. Only now did he realize that his ankles had been completely cut off by these human soldiers. Kill him! Kong Xian's voice came from behind the giant. His voice was firm and cold. As soon as he spoke, the 100 cavalrymen began a frenzied slaughter. The Wuxi's steel longswords in their hands were indestructible, and they continuously slashed at the giant's shoulders, arms, waist, and thighs, leaving behind sharp sword marks. Blood flowed like water from every part of the giant's body, splattering all over the ground. Death scythe! A series of fierce shouts came from the formation of 100 cavalrymen. The moment the giant fell, 7 well-trained and seemingly extremely powerful Wuxiang cavalrymen pressed their hands on the backs of their horses and suddenly leaped into the air. The 7 of them formed the most refined scythe of the Grim Reaper and climbed up the giant's body like monkeys. In the War of the Southwest, Wang Chong had used the Death God Scythe team to deal with the most basic version of the giants. Although they were still using the Death God Scythe array, these 7 people were completely different from the original Death God Scythe team. This was a special energy that Wang Chong had specially trained to deal with the skyquaking giants. Boom! The sound of horse hooves and smoke billowed. After leaving the Reaper squad of 7 people, the other Wuxiang cavalry followed Kong Xian like a tide. Meanwhile, the other 100-man Wuxiang teams were also charging at the other skyquaking giants. Each skyquaking giant they dealt with would leave behind a Death God Scythe team, and then the other Wuxiang cavalry would continue forward. 1, 2, 3. In the blink of an eye, the 5,000 Wuxiang cavalry had divided into more than 100 Death God Scythe teams. Depending on the strength of the skyquaking giants, they would form groups of 2, 3, or 4 to attack the skyquaking giants. Damn it! You useless things! The red-bearded leader of the skyquaking giants was enraged by the sight of them being held down. I'll do it myself. Humans, ant-like things, I'll kill you all. Thump! The red-bearded giant stomped forward, causing the rocks on the ground to shatter as it crossed a distance of 8 or 9 meters, with astonishing speed, toward the giant ballistae controlled by Chen Bin and Suki. Load! Release! The air rumbled, and a long giant crossbow bolt shot through the air, heading straight for the red-bearded giant in the lead. The giant ballista bolt left blurry black afterimages in its wake. Chen Bin and Suki sensed danger, and immediately fired their ballista bolts. But in a flash of light, the red-bearded giant seemed to have sensed this bolt. In a flash, his body tilted to the side, allowing him to dodge the bolt. How could this be? Seeing this, the two of them felt their bodies tremble. The giant ballista bolts were extremely fast, even faster than ballista bolts. Once they were shot, it would be very difficult to dodge. Moreover, the giant was over 10 meters tall, making it an extremely large target. It was impossible for it to miss. Yet the red-bearded giant had been able to dodge it. Just this point alone showed that he was much stronger than the other giants. You lowly humans! Take one of my attacks. The red-bearded giant grabbed 2 strong horse corpses and threw them out like cannonballs, one on each side. Careful! Chen Bin's expression tightened as he drew out his sword and dashed toward the horse's corpse. At almost the same time, the 6 or 7 other ballista warriors guarding the giant ballistae also flew into the air. Together with Chen Bin, they charged at the horse corpse. Bang bang! In the blink of an eye, the few of them mustered all their strength and attacked the horse carcass. Rumble! As Chen Bin and the 7 ballista warriors collided with the horse corpse, an indescribable feeling welled up in their hearts. Chen Bin felt as if he had slammed into a hard mountain with all his strength. Not only did all his strength not have the slightest effect, but he was also hit by a huge force from the horse carcass, causing all the bones in his body to crack, as if they were falling apart. Not only that, but even his 5 viscera and 6 bowels had been severely impacted in that instant. Plush! Chen Bin tasted blood in his throat as he was sent flying like a broken kite, crashing into the giant ballista behind him. At the same time, there was a scream as the other ballista warriors were also sent flying, crashing into different places. In a flash, Chen Bin and the 7 elite ballista warriors had been heavily injured by the horse corpse that the red-bearded giant had casually thrown at them. Compared to the red-bearded giant, they were far too weak. Boom boom! At almost the same time, several more horse corpses were thrown out. Suki screamed as he and several other elite ballista soldiers were also heavily injured. At this moment, there was nothing left between the red-bearded giant and the 2 giant ballistae, and the closest Wuxian cavalry was still 100 zhang away. A good chance! The red-bearded giant was elated. His body shot forward as he charged at full speed toward one of the giant ballistae. Load! Load! Don't let him get close. Use the giant ballistae to kill him. Without Suki and Chen Bin in charge, the remaining ballista warriors immediately began to panic. At this time, the only thing that could stop the red-bearded giant was the Tang Dynasty ballistae. Boom boom boom. The air boomed and steel screeched. In a few short moments, 10 some long black ballista bolts shot toward the giant from all directions. Haha! The red-bearded giant coldly chuckled. His body shrank back as he swung the dark green arm shield in his hand. With a whirlwind of force, 7 or 8 black ballista bolts were sent flying. As for the other ballista bolts, they seemed to strike the hardest wall, and were all blocked. While blocking these ballista bolts, the red-bearded giant's footsteps continued to rumble. In just a few moments, he was less than 7 or 8 meters away from one of the giant ballistae. With his height, a single step was all he needed to reach that giant ballista. Not only that, in order to better coordinate their attacks, Chen Bin and Suki were using the giant ballistae to their fullest potential, so the 2 ballistae were not too far apart from each other. This meant that when the red-bearded giant attacked the first ballista, It was only 30 or 40 meters away from the other ballista. Danger! No matter what, we can't let him get close. If the giant ballistae are destroyed, all of us will die. Everyone follow me. Charge. Everyone who saw this scene paled and panicked. 20-some Tang Dynasty cavalry rushed forward to stop the giant ballistae, but it was too late. The red-bearded giant only had eyes for the two giant ballistae. He didn't even look at them. Boom! A massive foot wearing a dark green blazing boot suddenly rose from the ground and stomped down on the giant ballista closest to the giant ballistae. Even before that foot landed, the air around it began to howl, and the enormous wind pressure sent the three soldiers controlling the giant ballistae tumbling through the air. Given the strength that the red-bearded giant had displayed, if this foot landed, this giant ballista, which had taken so much effort to assemble, would instantly shatter into countless pieces. Ah! Cries of alarm rang out from all around, as the giant ballista, that had sustained their lives, was about to be destroyed by the red-bearded giant's foot. At this moment, a thin figure suddenly appeared in front of the giant ballista. This person was dressed in a white robe, his long hair flying in the wind. While everyone was stunned by the red-bearded giant's strength and believed that the giant ballista was doomed to be destroyed, this person suddenly raised his head, looked at the descending foot, and raised a single finger. Bang! In that instant, time seemed to stand still. The red-bearded giant's foot, which could even shatter steel, landed on the man's outstretched finger. It was as if it had crashed into the world's hardest barrier. The air exploded, and the powerful chi roared, washing over the surroundings like a huge wave. However, it was unable to shake the man's finger. What the hell? Just who are you? The red-bearded giant's pupils constricted and his face paled. He was keenly aware of just how powerful and terrifying his foot was. For this person to use a single finger to block, it was not something that an ordinary person could do. King of Gonka. That person raised his head and coldly said those 4 words. In the next moment, a terrifying energy burst out from his body like a tidal wave. Killing tide. Chapter 973. I admit that I underestimated you. I didn't think that you would have such strength. But that's all it is. This time, I will first kill you, and then destroy those 2 giant ballistae. The red-bearded giant looked at his unscathed body, and his expression instantly relaxed. As a sign of respect for you, after killing you, I will remember your name, King Gonka. Is that so? The King Gonka sneered at the red-bearded giant, his eyes fixed on the giant's legs. What do you mean? The red-bearded giant grimaced as he stared at the King Gonka. But before he could finish speaking, there was a metallic crack from beneath his feet. Before the red-bearded giant could react, he saw the sturdy dark green war boots under his feet suddenly explode with countless cracks. In just an instant, the boots exploded into countless pieces, scattering all over the ground. Even more shocking to the red-bearded giant was that the instant the boots exploded, a fierce and destructive energy exploded from the soles of his feet. This energy traveled up the red-bearded giant's right foot and spread throughout his body. Plush! Blood sprayed everywhere, and the red-bearded giant's right foot was bleeding profusely. A heart-wrenching pain surged from the soles of his feet to his brain, and the red-bearded giant couldn't help but cry out. You! The red-bearded giant rapidly retreated, a hint of shock finally appearing on his face as he stared at the nearby King Gonka. To be able to shatter his heavenly god battle boots with a single finger, just this fact alone proved that the strength of the human before him far surpassed his imagination. You're celebrating too early. The King Gonka raised his robes and began to stride forward. In the western regions, the Gonka tribe was known as the Filthy Boars. As the ruler of this tribe, the King Gonka had always hidden his strength, only revealing it now. Bright Fist of Massacre. The King Gonka's expression was callous. After taking 2 steps, he suddenly leapt into the air and lunged at the nearly 20-meter red-bearded giant, like a giant bird. Bzzz. He swung his right fist, and the air in a radius of several dozen feet twisted as a massive fist image appeared behind him, followed by a third and a fourth. In a few short moments, Hundreds of fist images had appeared behind the King Gonka, forming a massive mountain of fists that smashed down on the red-bearded giant. The Bright Fist of Massacre was a fist technique that the King Gonka had learned in his early years in the Central Plains. The stronger the enemy, the more powerful this fist technique would be. At most, it could exert 4 times the user's strength, but it would place an enormous burden on the body. After obtaining it, the Gonka king had devoted himself to studying it, combining it with the martial arts of the western regions. He had increased the power of this fist art by at least 5 times, and he had also reduced the burden on his body by a great deal, resulting in the Bright Fist of Slaughter. I don't believe that I'll lose to a puny human. Die! Seeing the King Gonka lunge at him, the red-bearded giant seemed to be greatly humiliated. Suddenly enraged, he gathered all the strength in his body and viciously smashed at the rising King Gonka. Rumble! The red-bearded giant's iron fist streaked through the air like a meteor. Wherever it passed, black cracks seemed to appear in the air. Given the red-bearded giant's innate strength, this all-out attack could probably shatter a mountain. If an ordinary human were to take this punch, they would die without a doubt. Boom! The 2 iron fists, one large and one small, fiercely collided in the air. In that instant, the wind howled, and even the sky seemed to split open. As countless Tang Dynasty soldiers and giants watched, the seemingly stronger red-bearded giant gave a shrill scream. His right fist suddenly split open, blood gushing out like a waterfall, and his fist bent backward at a strange angle. Under the immense force, the red-bearded giant fell to his knees, kicking up a cloud of dust. This is all the so-called giants amount to. The King Gonka sneered and lunged forward. The King Gonka's appearance had caused a slight reversal on the battlefield, rousing the morale of the surrounding soldiers. Even though the King Gonka and Wuxiang's cavalry had improved the projectile attacks of the sky-quaking giants, the Tang Dynasty was still in a terrible situation. Roar! The giant beasts roared. 4 giant beasts that were as large as mountains charged toward the first line of defense. 700 zhang, 600 zhang, 500 zhang. At this distance, everyone could even smell the stench of blood wafting from the giant beasts. Behind the behemoths were 2 times the number of Tang Dynasty Arab cavalry, howling as they followed the 4 behemoths. If the behemoths were the vanguard, they were the rear. At a distance of 600 zhang, the Tang Dynasty soldiers behind the first defense line could clearly see the bulging muscles of the Arab cavalry, the bulging veins and blood vessels on the backs of their hands, and the savage expressions and bloodthirsty gazes in their eyes. Rumble! In a place that no one could see, bang! A part of the ground suddenly split open, and a yellow-brown monster that looked like a giant centipede suddenly burrowed out of the ground. This monster had many appendages, and its skin and body were as hard as rock. It also had a head that was as sharp as a sword. On the head of this monster was a hideous hunchbacked man dressed in a crimson robe. He was none other than the leader of the behemoth army, Mazel. Buzz! Mazel began to form a spell on the head of the centipede monster. In a flash, faint rays of light vanished into the air, heading toward the 4 mountainous behemoths. Kill, kill. Kill all these infidels for me. Leave none alive. Mazel's eyes shone with a chilling light as he stared at the steel defense line. The behemoths were very difficult to control, and when they attacked, they basically didn't distinguish between friend and foe. Thus, Mazel rarely controlled more than 2 behemoths at once. Even when he did use 2, he would keep them very far apart, so that they could attack different targets. Just like the Terrorizer and the Destroyer, one destroying the defense line, while the other destroying the city. But now, 3 powerful behemoths had been slain by the Tang Dynasty, causing Mazel to lose all face in front of the 200,000 Arab soldiers. In order to restore the reputation of the behemoth army, Mazel had finally been forced to personally participate in this battle. In all of Arabia, only he could control 4 behemoths at the same time without accidentally injuring his own army. Rumble! After carefully calculating the direction of the 4 behemoths, the distance between them, and their condition, Mazel had the centipede monster make a turn in the air and burrow back into the earth. The hard rock seemed as soft as mud in a swamp to the centipede monster. In a flash, Mazel and the centipede monster had vanished into the earth. After they disappeared, the ground returned to normal, and no traces could be seen. Behind them, two figures exuding powerful auras were seated on their divine steeds, their eyes like lightning bolts as they calmly observed the course of the battle. The Skyquaking army has already achieved its goal. The Tang dynasty can't even fend for itself, and has fallen into disarray. Gao Xianji and the other Tang dynasty commanders have also been exhausted by the behemoths, and are no longer at their peak. The Arab deputy governor of the East, Ziyad, said as he followed closely behind Abu Muslim. The gales caused the armor of the Arab horsemen to clatter and clang, but Ziyad remained seated on his horse, his body exuding an invisible energy that kept all the winds at bay. His expression was as determined as steel. He had been observing this battle this entire time. At this stage of the battle, the 100,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty had fallen into their rhythm. If this situation continued, it would only take a few hours for all the soldiers of the Tang dynasty to be wiped out. Once these Tang people were killed, the final obstacle on the Arabian Eastern expedition would be swept away. Don't get careless. Until the Tang dynasty is truly defeated, even if we have the absolute advantage, we can't underestimate the enemy. Are the deaths of the terrorizer and destroyer not enough to prove the problem? Abu Muslim said, but his expression was abnormally calm, not the slightest hint of pride on his face. A ripple of emotion appeared in Abu Muslim's eyes as he scanned the corpses of the two behemoths. Both the terrorizer and destroyer were extremely powerful existences in Arabia, and they had destroyed countless enemies and cities. But who could have imagined that these powerful existences would suffer a crushing defeat at Talas, dying at the hands of these infidels? Far too many inconceivable things had happened to the Tang dynasty, especially that young commander. Thus, Abu Muslim did not dare to be the slightest bit careless until the battle was won. In addition, the two giant ballistae had still not been destroyed. Harassing the enemy army and breaking them from within was important, but to Abu Muslim, destroying the two giant ballistae was far more important. What's the situation with Gharib Hassam? As the leader of the Skyquaking army, he should be taking action soon, Abu Muslim said. The order has already been passed on. Gharib Hassam should have already received the news. If everything goes as expected, he should be taking action very soon, Deputy Governor Ziyad sincerely said. Deputy Governor Ziyad sincerely said, although the Skyquaking giants were powerful, the upper echelon of the Arab army tended to look down on them, because they were not very intelligent. But Ziyad clearly had a different attitude toward the Skyquaking army's commander, Gharib Hassam. Pass on my order. Have him speed up. Abu Muslim said. Yes. Ziyad waved a hand behind him, and an Arab messenger quickly turned and left. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.